Chapter 1554. The Dragon Sleep Temple knew nothing about this, but unfortunately, they couldn't hide it from a transmigrator like Duque. The queen's figure was trembling. This is no small matter. The Black Dragon Princess said with certainty, "Why don't you take your men and come with me?" The queen was also very decisive. "Give me a day, I want to gather the Red Dragon army. Tomorrow at noon, I'll wait for you at the Dragon Sleep Temple." Okay. After agreeing with Onyxia, the queen looked at Duque again. "The Dragon Sleep Temple owes you another favor. If Malygos really does something reckless without asking for a reason, the Dragon Sleep Temple will stand on the side of justice." The queen said this, which meant that if it really came to that, the dragons could only give up on Malygos. After all, they knew their brother's trap best. In these 10,000 years, hadn't the queen lamented Malygos countless times? In the past, Azeroth wasn't dangerous. If Malygos wanted to be crazy or autistic, it was up to him. Now, he kept making mistakes. If it wasn't for him helping to guard the Void battlefield a while ago, Alexstrasza almost wanted to start a vote in the Dragon Sleep Temple to remove him from his position as the Blue Dragon King. Just now, Duque had been tough because he wanted her to see the big picture. Any existence that stood in the way of protecting Azeroth would be crushed to pieces. It wasn't that she hadn't heard the argument that Malygos should ban mortals from using magic and bring it under his jurisdiction. In fact, if she really did that, where would Duque, the demigod of the Weave, stand? The alliance led by Duque was already the core force against the Burning Legion and the fallen ancient gods. If the Dragon Sleep Temple still protected Malygos at this time, then it would be violating the duty that the Titans had left them. In the face of the big picture, Alexstrasza had to make a promise. Duque was very satisfied. Letting the Dragon Sleep Temple clean up first was actually clearing the mines in advance. This was like cutting off the enemy's claws and teeth in advance. This method of weakening the opponent step by step and then dealing a fatal blow just so happened to be what Onyxia valued and liked the most. Ending the magic communication, Duque felt Onyxia's scorching gaze. He turned slightly and met Onyxia's eyes. Interestingly, Duque felt that her gaze had become similar to Vashti's. It was a pleasant surprise that the Black Dragon girl, who used to be a little reluctant, would change like this. Ignoring her, Duque turned to Theon. "Tonight's mission has been accomplished. Cancel the red alert and lower the alert level to yellow." Theon nodded. Understood. There was no need for Duque to make arrangements for small matters like defense. Although Gavin Rad suggested speeding up the construction of the Fearless Stronghold, Duque shook his head and refused. In the world of ice and snow, the Lich King's family wasn't the only one looking for trouble. After the internal troubles of the Dragon Slumber Shrine were eliminated, there were only 2 enemies left. To be precise, it was 1.5. At this time, another magical message came. It was from Queen Sylvanas. "Duque, a few half-crippled bone dragons escaped here. Tyrant and I have decided to train the Aerial Knight's pursuit ability. We won't go back tonight." Duke nodded. "All right, thank you for your hard work." Fighting against an overlord of the sky like ice dragons was a rare experience. And in a situation where they had the upper hand, training the troops like this would reduce their losses. It was impossible for Arthas to not have any ice dragons left. Training the troops now would greatly reduce losses when the time came. With a wave of his hand, Duque opened a portal and brought Onyxia back to the Lordaeron Palace. Seeing the familiar light of the portal, the guards guarding the fixed portal still gripped their weapons dutifully. Seeing that it was Duque, they heaved a sigh of relief and saluted. Duque arrived at Kalia's palace unimpeded. As soon as the door opened, Kalia, who was wearing a nightgown, pounced on him and gave Duque a pecking kiss. "I heard." "Thank you, Duque," Kalia said excitedly. Beside her was Gianna, who was smiling. Seeing the Black Dragon Princess beside her, Kalia let go of Duque and grabbed her hand. "Thank you too, Onyxia." The Black Dragon Princess was clearly not used to such intimate contact. She looked like she wanted to pull her hand back, but did not dare to. After a while, she could only bite the bullet and say, "This is Master's order." Her face was full of an "I didn't do it willingly" expression. "But it is still a fact that you helped defend Lordaeron." Kalia held the Black Dragon's hand and leaned her head closer. The Black Dragon was not used to the burning light in her eyes. Most dragons were aloof. After Onyxia was born by her mother, she did not have any family warmth to speak of. Sinestra had been merciful enough not to kill the two siblings back then. After growing up, even her eldest brother, Nefarian, was in a relationship of mutual benefit. When had she ever experienced such intimate gratitude? It wasn't until this moment that Onyxia realized that she had social phobia in her bones. Not to mention the nobles of Stormwind that she played with back then. They were just pawns. When she really put the other party in the same position as her, she was suddenly at a loss. Just as she was about to retreat, Duke had already blocked her path of retreat without her noticing. Duque smirked. He suddenly realized that the clumsy Black Dragon Princess actually had a cute side. "It's very simple, Onyxia. Just say, 'No need to thank me, this is what I should do.' That's very likable. What's the point of being stubborn now? What was originally cute will become not cute at all." Cute? Onyxia felt as if a certain soft part of her heart had been struck by lightning. Her whole body trembled, but she could not tell why. "Cute? Can someone like me be cute?" she muttered to herself in a daze. Even before she came out of her shell, she felt that she had always been associated with words like terror, ferociousness, destruction, and destruction. Even her own mother would only look at her with a mixture of fear and horror. As she grew up, she began to enslave many monsters, dragon men, and a bunch of random creatures. Every existence looked at her with the same gaze. She used to feel uncomfortable, but after she got used to it, she told herself that she should be happy. Gradually, her heart became twisted. Unexpectedly, after being treated as spineless and depraved submission. After being a mount for so long, she discovered another kind of feeling. Strangely, she found that her heart instinctively desired this kind of feeling. "Cute, me? Yes, you are very cute now." Duque was amused. He suddenly realized that when he poked the Black Dragon Princess' waist with his finger, she actually made a sound similar to a cat's meow. It was so charming. Chapter 1555. After a night of dragon taming, Duque was starting to doubt his life. Onyxia's taming last night made him think that he was dealing with Kalia, and not the once cunning and sinister evil female Black Dragon. But this was good, as it saved him the trouble of keeping a close eye on her. Having two female Eridar demons under him was enough of a headache. Playing this kind of game of mutual deception would be tiring. Of course, he had to be rewarded. When Onyxia woke up, Duque told her a secret. "Have you heard of Archiphone's treasury?" Of course, Onyxia had never heard of this thing before, but that didn't stop her from hearing the most important word, treasure vault. Treasures were the love of greedy she-dragons. What? Tell me. Countess Katrana, who used to exude a seductive aura, was now a greasy little fairy. The treasury is at Wintergrasp Lake. There is indeed a lot of good equipment there, but you won't want them. Why? She asked even though she knew that Duque was trying to bait her. Because the key to the treasury lies in the few guardians. Wintergrasp Lake, where the treasury was located, was the largest lake in Northrend. With its unique strategic location and rich elemental materials, it naturally became a place that the Alliance and the Horde fought over. Now that the Horde's army had not set off, and young Salyafar was still gathering his subordinates in the barren lands, Archiphone's treasury naturally had nothing to do with the Horde. The location of the treasury was rather sensitive. From the map of Azeroth, the shape of Northrend in the north was a bit like a big kidney. The west and east sides were closer to the central maelstrom, while the Dragonbone Waste in the middle of the Wormrest Temple was sunken into the north. Although there were traces of the Scourge army throughout Northrend, strictly speaking, the southern region was not under their control. The Scourge army's absolute control was actually the Icecrown Glacier in the northwest of Northwind. On the map, Wintergrasp Lake was located at the midpoint between the Alliance's new Fearless Fortress in the Northwind Tundra region and Arthas Icecrown Fortress. It was only a mountain away from the Second Fool's Nest. It could be said that the treasury was quite close to the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, which could reach Arthas' lair, the Icecrown Fortress. However, it was not within the Doomsday Army's absolute control. As an ancient Titan building, the treasures inside could not be underestimated. The Guardians were the Rock Guardian Archavon, the Storm Guardian Emeron, the Flame Guardian Kolalan, and the Ice Guardian Turawan. The 4 demigod guardians were typical elemental giants. Duque didn't know if they had divinity in them. Even if they didn't, the incomparably pure power of the 4 elements in them was a great supplement for Duque and Onyxia. After becoming a demigod of the Weave continuously absorbed the spiritual force of its user. It also used the excess spiritual force to connect to the 4 major elemental realms, extracting the wandering elements and filtering them before sending them to the spellcaster for use. In the process, Duque had refined many high-purity elements. However, the higher the purity, the harder it was to refine, and a battle between gods required extremely high-purity elements to hurt the other party. In the battle with Kill Jaden, Duque had experienced this deeply. If he had been the main attacker in the battle at the Well of the Sun, who knew how long it would take to grind the eggs to death? After explaining the characteristics of the treasury to Onyxia, Duque concluded, Archavon's treasury is both an opportunity and a trap for Arthas. I understand. It's a good opportunity. It was easy to talk to a clever dragon. If they waited until the Fearless Fortress was built before going to Archavon's treasury, it would become a push, and Arthas would definitely not consider attacking casually. On the other hand, if Duque went to the treasury now, whether Arthas came out or not, the Alliance would benefit. If he came out, Duque, who now had the air advantage, would definitely not mind letting Elun throw a bunch of meteorites at him to teach the fool a lesson. If he didn't come out, because Duque was wandering in front, the Scourge would definitely not dare to pass by Duque and attack the Fearless Fortress directly. This would also buy time for the Fearless Fortress to be built. This was where Duque's strategy was ruthless. First knock out the Scourge's strongest air force, then step by step cut off the Scourge's space of activity and cut off their wings. This kind of strategy could be said to be steady and imposing, and it was used by the Alliance, so it was not easy to make mistakes. In the morning, after washing up, Duque took the Black Dragon Princess and Jaina and opened the portal to Naxxramas. In the command post of this flying fortress, Duque held a video conference with the Alliance leaders. Magni Bronzebeard was the first to ask, "What? You said you want to attack Archavon's treasury? I have no problem with this, but Duque, do you mean we are going to attack Anjasa, the Gate of Heaven's Wrath?" Duque raised his hand, and a general 3D map of the Icecrown Glacier appeared in front of the kings. It had to be said that Zol and Arthas had chosen a good place for their nest. The terrain of the Icecrown Glacier was very high, located in the northwest of Northrend, with an average altitude of more than 1,000 meters. The whole area looked like a omega on the map, or it could be said to be shaped like a horseshoe. Duque explained, there are only 2 ways to reach the Icecrown Fortress where the Lich King Arthas is located. One is to attack the Gate of Heaven's Wrath in the southwest side of the mountain, and after that, the Icecrown Fortress is right above the gate. The second is to obediently follow the Lich King's line of defense from the southeast all the way to the north side of the canyon, braving the firepower from the top of the canyon, then circle back from the north to the Court of Bones, in the southwest, and finally kill their way to the Icecrown Fortress. This choice would make any commander with a little common sense frown. This kind of detour was simply sending food to the Scourge army. Not to mention the firepower from the top of the canyon, just the people who died in the canyon and were resurrected on the spot were enough to make the attackers suffer. More and more enemies would appear every minute. Can't we attack from the air? Kudrin frowned deeply. My men are already used to flying in cold weather, give us some time. Duque shook his head, impossible. Duque casually waved his finger, and on the 3D map, the plateau basin where the ice-crowned glacier was located was suddenly enveloped by a mournful howl of a blizzard. Duque sternly said, "This time, Arthas clearly has the geographical advantage. I have tried many times, but I can't extend the magic net to the ice-crowned glacier and the storm cliffs in the east. That is Arthas' absolute home ground, and he can summon a large number of frost elementals in that area at will, destroying all the aerial knights and flying fleets that approach." Chapter 1556. This was going to be hard to deal with. At that moment, all the leaders of the alliance frowned. Not being able to use their air force was tantamount to wiping out the alliance's current technological advantage. If they were to return to the most primitive land warfare, how many lives would they have to sacrifice to break through the ice-crowned fortress? No. It would be fine if they could calculate the total number of lives lost, but they were afraid that the Scourge army would become stronger and stronger, and the number of undyings would increase. This was not a joke. The whole of Northrend was already full of undyings. Zudak, in the northeast corner of Northrend, was the territory of the ice trolls after the explosion of the Well of Eternity. Now it had become a paradise for the undead. In the southeast corner was the settlement of the savage, violent, and vicious Vrykul people. This group of half-giant bloodline warmongers mistakenly regarded the Lich King as the Lord of Justice, who could lead them to conquer Northrend and even the whole world. The warriors of the various factions who had come on the expedition had become a huge obstacle to their ambitions. The extreme warmongers had completely reduced them to the lackeys of the Scourge army. Under the call of King Imolan, groups of savage Vrykul warriors became undead and turned into the Scourge army as the greatest glory. They used their endless destruction and slaughter to prove their strength in exchange for dying in battle to become the Scourge army. Apart from Duque, no one knew how strong the Lich King Arthas was now. If the elites of the Alliance and the Horde were to be sacrificed, they would be able to create another batch of bone griffins or undead hippogriffs. Then, together with the power of the Scourge army, they would be able to raise the Dragonbone Temple to the ground, turning all the dragon remains in the Dragonbone Waste into undead dragons. Then, Azeroth would be finished. William said, "Uncle Duque, do you have any good suggestions? This attack on the Alcaphon treasury is just a simple trap. It doesn't matter if Arthas takes our bait or not. In the big battle, we have to fight steadily." Duque raised his hand, and the chess piece representing the Alliance's army began to move on the 3D map. On the western front, once the Fearless Fortress is built, we will immediately advance all the way north and occupy the entire Northwind Taiga, Sriracha Basin, and Winter Embrace Lake. I hope that the Western Army can use Winter Embrace Lake as a base and cooperate with Naxxramas to confront the Ice-Crown Fortress. We have to create the impression that Naxxramas will hit the Ice-Crown Fortress at any time. Ah! Hoof Iral let out a small cry. She was shocked by Duque's idea. Naxxramas with Arthas. After all, Naxxramas was a creation of the Titans. No matter how terrible Arthas' cold wind was, it could not blow Naxxramas down with its anti-gravity engine. Losing Naxxramas was akin to the Scourge shooting themselves in the foot. The alliance with. After everyone paused for a moment, Duke continued, "The arrangements for the Western Front are almost done. Magni, I'll give you 50,000 human infantry. I'll leave the Western Front to you." The Dwarf King laughed heartily. The Western Front was made up of dwarves and gnomes. The Western Front had always been dominated by the dwarves and gnomes, so it was easy for him to go there. Now we have to deal with the Eastern Front. With a wave of Duque's hand, a fleet model appeared in the east. I need a large-scale landing battle from both the east and west sides of the Howling Fjord. Try to occupy the Vrikel's Utgard castle within a week. Then head north, flatten the Grizzly Hills and Zudak, and finally reach the Crystal Song Forest in the middle. Leave it to me. Varian stood up and volunteered. Duque smiled. Even if you didn't ask, I would have done it. But this time, I'll have to trouble you to bring young Seraphar's orc troops. They'll be a good hand in the siege. Do I have air cover here? Yes. Since most of the flying fleet is useless in the Ice-Crown Glacier, they'll be transferred to the Eastern Front when we reach the Winter Embrace Lake. Also. Duque glanced at Prince Kale. That's. The prince understood and smiled. When His Majesty Rin attacks Utgard Castle, the Dalajan will arrive. Attention! It's the Dalajan, not the Dalajan Wizard Legion. This meant that the Dalajan was really going to use all of its power. Hiss! This time, all the leaders gasped. Using the entire country to suppress them. The power was great, but on the other hand, if they failed, it would be equivalent to the destruction of the country. All the wizards and their apprentices would become liches and necromancers. Kale, that was really daring. But after thinking about it, they felt relieved. The true ruler of the Dalajan was Duque, the demigod of the weave. Without his instructions, how could Kale, that suppress the Dalajan academies and make such a bold move? Among the countries, other than the Dalajan, who had the ability to move their capital, there was also the Driniai's Exodar. Although it could be assumed that the alliance was taking care of the severely injured Driniai, Duke did not even ask Imriel about it, which made Imriel feel like he was the only one who was alienated. Hoof bit her lip and said to herself, Imriel, oh Imriel. You must do something, or else you and your people will continue to be secretly ostracized. In fact, she was thinking too much. Firstly, the Driniai were small in number and weak. Secondly, Duque was afraid that if the Driniai were to enter the battlefield, it would further damage the Driniai's vitality. Duque had informed the other leaders to try not to let the Driniai be the infantry in the charge, but in the end, it made Hoof think too much. Duque did not notice this detail and continued to arrange the army. As the fearless fortress was quickly built, Vasht's Naga and Murloc army were naturally transferred to the Eastern Front. When she saw that even the Naga and Karaji insect people had missions, Hoof finally could not help but ask, Commander Marcus, may I ask what the Driniai's mission is? Merrid, who was standing beside her, took a step forward so that his body was closer to the front of the 3D projection. His intention to fight was obvious. Duque was speechless, but then he smiled. All right then, I originally considered that the Driniai's vitality was greatly injured. Imriel suddenly stood up and puffed out her chest. Commander, please do not worry. The Driniai's responsibility is to exorcise evil. We have long been used to sacrifice. Imriel's words were sonorous and powerful, and many of the Alliance leaders were moved. All right then, promise me a few conditions. Please speak. I can put the Driniai's holy knights together with the Silver Hand, and they will be responsible for the final assault on the Ice Crown Fortress. But in the assault team, only children without descendants are not allowed to enter, no siblings are allowed to enter, and only one family is allowed to enter. Chapter 1557. Everyone fell silent when they heard this. Who didn't have friends and family in this world? Everyone knew that Duque was doing this for the good of the Driniai. Unknowingly, Imriel's eyes became a little moist. Fair and just, yet humane. Perhaps it was because the Alliance had such a leader that it was so strong. Imriel felt that she had wronged Duque. Thank you for your understanding, Lord Commander. The Driniai will take note of this, but we hope to participate in more aspects and truly integrate into the big family of the Alliance. Hoof's words were very appropriate. It was hard to imagine that she was still a young girl half a year ago. Most of the leaders smiled. They were never stingy with encouraging juniors with potential, just like how Magni nurtured William back then. Moreover, with Duque's backing, they could do whatever they wanted. As for Hoof's request, Duque basically satisfied it. After all, the Holy Knight was the symbol of the Alliance and had an irreplaceable role. Their existence itself was a symbol of the fight against evil. Compared to mages who needed talent, Holy Knights could basically become a Holy Knight as long as they were devout. At this critical juncture against the Scourge army, the more devout Drenii could obviously play a greater role. After the meeting, fierce battles broke out all over Northrend. First was the Obsidian Temple. Under Onyxia's lead, the Red Dragon army swarmed in. Sure enough, they found Soterio with a group of adult black dragons hatching twilight dragons. To put it bluntly, Soterio couldn't even defeat Onyxia. His fate was decided from the moment the Obsidian Temple was attacked. When the angry Alexstrasza bit off Soterio's neck, Onyxia had almost killed the rest of the black dragons. The Red Dragon army entered the battlefield more to wipe out the Draconians and black dragons, as well as to prevent any of them from escaping. What a loss of composure. Not a single one of the chromatic dragons in the Dragon Slumber Temple discovered that Soterio was breeding such a blasphemous creature right under his nose. The Red Dragon Queen crushed the last Twilight Dragon egg with her claw. Onyxia held her neck high, her black vertical pupils filled with pride. My master is indeed the master of fate. Your Majesty Alexstrasza, I know. I will help Duque suppress the Heaven's Wrath Gate. The queen turned her head. Cleostras. Crassus lowered his head. Yes, your Majesty. I'm here. Pass down my order. Have all the mobility troops of the Sleeping Dragon Temple patrol the Dragonbone Waste. If they find any traces of the Scourge army, report immediately. The Red Dragon Queen gritted her teeth. Don't even think about desecrating the remains of our people. The activity of the Dragon Slumber Shrine also stimulated Arthes in the Ice Crown Fortress. Sitting upright on the ice throne, Arthes's entire body was enveloped by an icy wind that was close to absolute zero. Just getting close to the ice throne gave her the terrifying feeling that her body had been completely frozen. Are those giant lizards impatient to come here to die? Below the throne, an undead woman with huge demonic wings knelt on one knee. From her appearance, one could tell that she used to be a beautiful high elf. She was the Blood Queen Lanise. History changed again. In history, she was the confidant of the elf prince Kael, that's. When Kael, that's sided with Illidan, she followed Illidan to Northrend to crusade against Arthes. However, she, who was bent on revenge against the Scourge army, unfortunately died in battle. The dead Lanise and the other Blood Elf elites were resurrected by the Lich King and became the Sarine family. They assisted the Lich King in commanding the Scourge army to fight everywhere. In this life, because of Duque's incessant troubles, even Kael, that's did not side with Illidan. However, she unfortunately died while resisting Arthes' invasion of Cuel Salis and was turned into an undead. With the grass growing 3 feet high on Kel Thuzad's grave, Arthes, who had no one to use, had no choice but to promote her as his assistant. Lanise said in a low voice, Your Majesty, those lizards did not leave the Dragonbone Waste area, but they cleaned up a few of our Lich teams. Arthes waved her hand. Ignore them. I just want to know what Duke Marcus is doing. Duke Marcus himself led a team led by a demigod into Wintergrasp Lake Fortress. What? Why didn't you report to me earlier? A gust of cold wind blew, and half of the Blood Queen's body was instantly frozen in the extremely hard ice, leaving only her head outside. Lanise replied with difficulty, Your Majesty. That place has never been our sphere of influence. Now our gargoyles and deaths I can't leave the Icecrown Glacier area, humph. Arthes waved her hand, and the ice around Lanise's body instantly shattered. The Blood Queen knew that she had finally escaped the fate of destruction. Arthes's face darkened. He had shot himself in the foot this time. In order to resist Duke's Weave invasion, he had used a large number of frost elementals to surround his lair. The extremely cold ice storm isolated the enemy's spying, but it also caused his perception of the elements to drop to a low point. He was a paladin in life, and a death knight after death. Whether it was in life or after death, he was actually only good at frost elementals, and his perception of other elements was rather poor. This caused him to be unable to sense Duke when he suppressed his elemental fluctuations. Even if he swaggered past the foot of the mountain 10 kilometers away. Moreover, Winter Embrace Lake was originally a Titan ruin. There were their own elemental guards there, and the Lich King's undead could not enter the area at all. In the end, Duke had gotten the upper hand just like that. Just as Duke had expected, Duke's move had made him rather uncomfortable. Even the gargoyle that had spied on Duke's group entering Winter Embrace Lake stronghold had been deliberately let off by Duke. In the image, Duke had entered with Vashj and Onyxia, as well as Sylvanas, Jaina, and several other alliance powerhouses. In the end, he did not forget to smile at the gargoyle. This was clearly saying, "I'm right here, come out and hit me if you can." Arthes's entire body was trembling. Such provocation. Such arrogance. Did they really think that he, the Lich King, was a fake? Pass down my order. Attack from the gates of heaven's wrath. Your Majesty, could it be a trap? Lanais reminded softly. Trap? Of course it's a trap. But he underestimated my strength. He thought that I was still the same me that he had wantonly cut off my arm and cut into two at the waist. Arthes clenched his fists, underestimating my strength is his greatest failure. And the price is the eternal calamity of his soul. Since he destroyed Kel Thuzad, he will use his own soul to replace Kel Thuzad. He is a demigod. Lanais said with a trembling voice. There is no existence that can escape my enslavement after dying under my sword. Arthes slowly raised his world-famous, Frostmourne. The ferocious skeleton blade emitted the most vicious and vivid evil light. Chapter 1558. Any strong person's confidence and pride were two sides of the same coin. He felt that he had become a lot stronger, but it was difficult to quantify how much stronger he was. Even if it could be quantified, the opponent's experience, skill usage and rhythm, elemental control, and the surrounding environment would all affect the final outcome of the battle. Since Arthas called himself the Lich King, he at least had the spirit of a king. The unyielding king. No true king would readily admit that their skills were inferior to others. It was just like how he did not hesitate to send Sindagosa even though he knew that Lordaeron was a trap. After all, the Scourge army could easily grow in numbers. Apart from alchemists and management talents who could develop new monsters, everything else was expendable. Even though he had lost to Duke twice, Arthas was still fearless. He was already the Lich King, the enemy of all living beings in the world. If he still had any reservations, he wouldn't need to maintain the Scourge army. Just as Arthes was about to make her move, Duke and his entourage, who were theoretically supposed to have entered Archiphone's treasury, were currently in an ice house right next to the entrance of the treasury. The ice house was modeled after the Eskimos, and was hemispherical in shape. However, it looked even cooler when built. Duke used Magician's Hand to pull up a large pile of ice from the ground, and used magic to cut them into square ice blocks of 40 centimeters in length, width, and height. He then piled them up. A random icicle spell would blow up a large amount of snow, and anyone who saw it would see a pile of snow. This thing was very common in the world of ice and snow in No Scent. After entering the small door that was about half the height of a person, they entered a small world that was about 10 square meters. A magic formation that was lightly infused with frost elements isolated the air inside and outside. There was a small table beside a small heater. At this moment, they were playing landlord. King Bomb. Jaina smiled like a flower. No way. No wonder we can't even see the cards. Duque exclaimed. I'm not playing anymore. Let's switch to Oni or Celia. Queen Sylvia threw down her cards, seemingly distracted. Onyxia clearly had the question, when are you entering the treasury? Written all over her face, but her mouth said, I'm just a mount. Vashj also said, as a maid, being able to serve master and mistress is already a great blessing. Duque laughed heartily. Don't be so nervous. Regardless of whether he succeeded in luring the enemy or not, this would not be the place for the final battle. Only the summit of Ice Crown Fortress would decide the outcome of the battle. This is the choice of fate. Queen Sylvana sighed when she saw Onyxia's eyes lit up. How could this once treacherous black dragon be so easily fooled? Jaina, on the other hand, was at ease. She even pestered Duque to ask if he had any fun games. She shook Duque's shoulder so intimately that Duque almost lost his mind and took out the mahjong. However, after thinking about it, Duque decided to give up. Mahjong was poisonous. Once he took it out, wouldn't it be suicidal if a group of queens ignored him and focused on playing mahjong? Duque said seriously, I still want to observe the situation at the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. The small magic mirror erected in the air was indeed showing the real-time situation of the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Unfortunately, this so-called surveillance was boring. The huge black gate, which was nearly 50 meters tall, stood quietly at the foot of the mountain, letting the wind and snow blow on it day and night. Rather than saying it was a gate, it was more like a simple decoration. The black iron skull on the gate did not look that fierce under the cover of the snow. It just gave people the feeling that, it was just so. So boring. Queen Sylvanas complained. Why don't I make you pregnant like how I made your sister pregnant? Queen Sylvie rolled her eyes at Duke before he could finish his sentence. I am me, my sisters are my sisters. Before I took care of Arthas, I was the Queen of Sin Dorii. Queen Sylvanas' meaning was clear. She would not think about having children until she got her revenge. Duque shrugged. He was just saying it out of boredom. A bunch of little kids running around in the Mage Tower, squealing. The Holy Land of Arcana had become a kindergarten. That kind of scene. Sorry, he did not dare to imagine it. At this moment, the huge gate of the Gate of Heaven's Wrath suddenly trembled. Roar, roar, roar. From small to large, the huge tremors caused the scenery that seemed to have remained unchanged for thousands of years to change. The ice on the door cracked and fell, exploding all over the ground. When the pitch-black gate opened, it was like an ancient beast opening its mouth. The wind and snow near the gate suddenly became stronger, and the image that was observed with the magician's eye and binoculars suddenly became blurry. In that kind of snowstorm where one couldn't even see their fingers in front of them, any attempt to observe the door with the naked eye seemed weak. Huh. Arthas, that brat, is getting more and more daring. Duke teased. Not only was Duque older than Arthas, he had started his career earlier. It was not too much to call him kid, but the Lich King would definitely be unhappy if he heard it. Jaina's expression darkened, and she warned, Duque, be careful. I feel a huge shift in the elemental network. Arthas has moved the exit of the entire frost elemental realm. Hee hee. If I can't even sense this, I'd be a demigod of the weave in vain. Duque's mouth twitched. Should we stop him? Or wait until he reaches Winter Embrace Lake? Queen Sylvanas asked. Stop him? Aren't we in Archivon's treasury now? If we suddenly run out, even a fool would shrink back. Duque smiled mysteriously. It had to be said that Arthas's entrance was very impressive. He waved Frostmourne, and all the frost elements in the world trembled. The ice elementals drifting around No Scent were like fanatical fans, crazily rushing towards Winter Lake. They gathered under Arthas's feet, forming a huge ice bridge under his unparalleled evil will. It extended from the west side of Heaven's Wrath all the way to the east side of Winter Embrace Lake. Although he couldn't see it on the screen, Duque could sense from the agitation of the frost elements that Arthas was sitting on a huge piece of floating ice. It was as if he was riding an escalator, sliding over. Just as Arthas and her men were about to descend on the floating ice the size of a football field, Duke's voice echoed in the air above Winter Embrace Lake's fortress. "Come down." His voice was clear, but it was as loud as thunder. The Calamity Army powerhouses were shocked. They raised their heads, but there was only a vast expanse of whiteness above them. Apart from the surging cold air and fluttering snowflakes, there was nothing else. What the hell was Duke Marcus doing? Chapter 1559. The heavy and huge helmet had a steel-green hue that seemed to isolate all life from it. On top of the crown of death, there was a small skull ornament in the middle that flickered with a demonic light. All of Arthas's expression was hidden behind the T-shaped opening of the helmet. Only the glint of her eyes could be seen, glowing blue in the wind and snow. Her long silver-white hair flowed out from the gap between the helmet and pauldrons, fluttering in the wind. The raging frost elements were vibrating, and the Lich King had already activated his full firepower. No one doubted that as soon as Duque showed his head, he would be attacked by Arthas. "Duke Marcus, this is Northrend." A sonorous voice full of resentment spread far and wide amidst the snowstorm. A disdainful voice came from the void. "Arthas. This is Azeroth." In an instant it was clear who was superior. Perhaps Arthas was the king of the dead in Northrend. "But I, Duke Marcus, am the demigod of Azeroth." Was Northrend bigger or Azeroth bigger? It was just a single sentence, but it was a resounding slap to the face. At this moment, Jaina, who was beside Duque, laughed so hard that she couldn't straighten her back. She whispered, "Duque, I like your magnanimity." Arthas was taken aback. If not for the heavy helmet of the Lich King covering his face, his subordinates would be able to see his face right now. Even if it wasn't an enraged expression, it would still be frighteningly gloomy. "Duke Marcus, do you only know how to use words?" Arthas raised his head slightly. There was no response from the sky. Only Arthas's slightly provocative voice echoed above the mountain walls and Winter Lake stronghold, like a gust of wind that no one would care about. "Very well, since Arthas is here." In the ice house, Duque clapped his hands happily. "With me as the standard, southwest 11 degrees 22 minutes, distance 1,494 meters. Let's start with a wave of attacks." Of course, Duque didn't say that to the girls in the ice house. In another magic mirror, there was the grinning face of Bulang Bronzebeard. Arthas suddenly heard an incomparably dense roar. Although it was very far away, she could still faintly hear the sound in the wind. She looked towards the south, and in the blink of an eye, her vision reflected a swarm of black dots that looked like locusts. Those were countless artillery shells. Boring. Arthas didn't even raise his right hand. He merely raised his left hand, which was covered in a heavy black iron glove, high up in the air, and an ice storm swept up in the sky. Countless icicles appeared out of thin air, forming a huge rotating curtain. Every artillery shell that entered within a kilometer of this ice tornado would be directly pulled into the center of the tornado. He thought that this was the end, but who knew that the shells that were supposed to explode with the firing pin and gunpowder would suddenly explode with a loud boom. Countless amounts of golden holy water splashed out along with the explosions of the cannonballs, as if golden fireworks were blooming in the sky. It was very beautiful, and it also stimulated His Majesty the Lich King's nerves. Arthas could clearly feel that because of the holy power within the artillery shells colliding with the evil power he had poured into the ice storm, his control over the ice storm was rapidly weakening. Humph. With a cold snort, more illusory thin white lines appeared on Arthas' left finger. This control over the ice element. Jaina, who was watching the battle through the magic mirror, was stunned. She was also a frost elementalist, and even though they were on different sides, she couldn't help but subconsciously praise Arthas. In a sense, Arthas's control over the ice element was also a goal for her to learn. Don't think that this is all to my welcoming ceremony. Duque snapped his fingers. Winter's Embrace Lake was Nascent's largest freshwater lake, but it was rarely visited. The biggest reason was that Winter's Embrace Lake was surrounded by mountains. The towering and precipitous mountains were the world's best city walls, protecting Winter's Embrace Lake. 2 kilometers away from Arthas, the flying battleship, Hood, was rapidly ascending. Above the mermaid portrait that was added later, Tyrant Whisperwind gracefully stood on the mermaid's shoulder. Her gaze crossed the 2 kilometers and locked onto Arthas's group. 2 kilometers was not even a black dot if she were to look at a person. If she were to look at an ice bridge that was created out of thin air, it would be a different story. So cool. Arthas. Tyrant's adopted daughter, Chandrise, teased. Tyrant rolled her eyes at Chandrise, then raised her hands high. Her jade-white arms had a faint bluish-purple color to them, and holy power circulated rapidly in her body, causing the atmosphere to vibrate along with the activation of the divine spell. Immediately after, a thick purple line descended from the clouds, piercing through the sky covered by the snowstorm. The meteor that descended from the atmosphere easily broke through the thick layer of snow and ice, ignoring Arthas's ice element. It crashed straight down, smashing straight towards where Arthas was. The Doomsday Army's powerhouses instantly froze. Most of the surrounding Alliance soldiers raised their heads to look at the trail of the bluish-purple comet descending from the sky. After Elun used this technique multiple times without sparing any of her divine power, the Alliance soldiers were no longer unfamiliar with it. However, due to the large-scale elimination of the cursing sect members, the Doomsday Army's ability to obtain information from the outside world had become even more sluggish. This was the first time most of the Doomsday Army's powerhouses had seen such a technique. Alu, Arthas recognized it, and a cold voice came from within the black helmet. Actually, up until this moment, Arthas could still choose to dodge. He was not willing to even take a step back. Because he was the Lich King Arthas. He was standing in his own territory. He was standing at the starting point of conquering the entire world. Starfall clearly had at least 10 more seconds to reach his head, but he was just standing there. No dodging. No dodging. Arthas raised, Frostmourne, high up, and the eye sockets of the skull on the blade emitted the darkest evil light. Under Arthas's feet, ice-blue runes spread out one after another, and every rune was shining. The chill of death spread endlessly with Arthas as the center, as if the place where he was standing right now was the ice throne hanging alone on the snowy peaks. All the Doomsday Army's leaders subconsciously retreated. Because what was about to erupt was a terrifying ultimate technique that could even freeze the souls of the undead. In the distance, Duque sighed, Arthas, you're really not bad. Duque was all too familiar with the power of Starfall. Not long ago, the same terrifying attack directly turned Kill Jaden into ashes. However, Arthas actually faintly showed the momentum of withstanding this attack. Chapter 1560. If Arthas endlessly extracted the frost elements in the frost elemental realm and then gathered them into a high density, every inch of ice would be harder than diamond. Perhaps this move of Elun's wouldn't be able to do anything to Arthas. The places where the moonlight could reach were indeed within the range of Elun's divine power. Unfortunately, the characteristics of the moon goddess determined that Elun's power could only hang in the sky. This made it difficult for her to use her ultimate skills consecutively. Whether it was Chandrise or Tyrant, only one of them could use the ultimate skill, Starfall, in a short period of time. Gathering the meteorites required time. Infusing the divine power of the moon goddess into the meteorites in order to maximize the control and destructive power also required time. Duke could already imagine the smug expression on Arthy's face as soon as she successfully withstood the attack from Qin Yi. Thus, Duke's next words were, "Since you're determined to be a boss, you should be mentally prepared to be ganged up on." Indeed, the entire area around Wintergrasp Lake was under the control of Arthy's frost elements. After becoming a Lich King, Arthy's enslavement of the frost elements had reached an insane level. With the help of the geographical advantage, even Duke couldn't fight with Arthy's for control of the frost elements. Since Duque could use the teleportation gate to kill Jaden and force him to be shot, he could do something similar this time. Less than 100 meters in front of him, a huge purplish-blue teleportation gate suddenly tore through the surrounding space and forcibly opened up a huge hole. Oh no! Blood Queen Lanais instinctively felt that something was wrong. She was a little far from Arthy's, but she did what a loyal hound should do. She worked very hard to repair the damage in space, trying to prevent Arthy's from opening the teleportation gate. Duque tilted his head. "Are you King kidding me?" Facing an undead Dawn Mage who hadn't even touched the edge of the demigod level and had even forcefully raised her magic power, if Duque still needed to use strength, he would be looking down on Duque. Atish abruptly slammed the ground with his left hand, and the portal that was starting to close abruptly widened, turning from a sleepy squint to a standard circle. On the walls of the hallucinatory space portal, one could even see strange structures that looked like bricks. They were the magicians who reinforced the space portal. Behind the blue-black metal helmet, Arthy's blue eyes blossomed even further. It was a frightening and aggressive divine light. He gripped Frostmourne tightly, glanced at the sky, and then pointed the tip of the sword in the direction of the portal. "Come." It was the Lich King's challenge. Sure. The Red Dragon Queen accepted the challenge. Without giving Arthy's any time to react, Alexstrasza, who was 30 kilometers away, spat out a mouthful of dragon breath towards the portal. Hu. As the leader of the five-colored dragon aspect, Alexstrasza's dragon breath was naturally extraordinary. Just the aftermath of the blazing dragon breath was enough to make the ancient red dragons guarding her unable to withstand it, and they all flapped their wings and retreated. If the Ice-Crown Citadel didn't have a magical protection spell, then the entire mountain would be completely melted by this dragon breath. It would be as easy as using a flamethrower to roast ice cream. Damn! This idea was thought of by Duque, but the problem was that when he put it into practice, Duque realized how sick the Red Dragon Queen's full-powered attack was. At first, Duque thought that her dragon breath was just a high-density fire element. In reality, that wasn't the case at all. As a dragon aspect that the Titans had personally given life and power, Alexstrasza's power was very special. She wasn't like Onyxia, who was purely a high-temperature, destructive fire that could incinerate everything. On the contrary, her flames not only contained divinity, but also a faint trace of vitality. Just like after a forest fire, it seemed like everything had withered, but in reality, after the violent destruction, the order of the entire forest was restored. One had to know that before the fire, the canopies of the towering trees covered the entire sky. They were densely packed, and the small trees below couldn't enjoy the sunlight at all, nor did they have the space and conditions to grow. The dragon breath that the Red Dragon Queen spewed contained a trace of order and restoration. This made Duque flustered for a while. He changed no less than 7 spatial spells in almost a second before barely ensuring that the Red Dragon Queen's dragon breath could pass through the spatial passage and hit Arthas directly. "Duke, you..." Arthy's curses were stuck in her throat before she could finish them. At first, Arthas thought that Duque couldn't handle it at all. Such a violent dragon breath would shatter the spatial passage before it could pass through. Who knew that Duque actually succeeded? This time, Arthas was immediately covered in blood. The crimson dragon breath rushed out of the portal and directly collided with the frost elements he had gathered. It was like a full-out sprint between two knights. The terrifying impact made all the adjectives pale in comparison. The violent turbulence of the elements caused countless pieces of ice and frozen soil to rise from the ground. In midair, the pure white frost domain that originally belonged to Arthas was retreating at a speed visible to the naked eye, but it was still pursued by the blazing flash of the dragon breath. The large and small explosions and shockwaves connected together, and the area around the portal looked like a bunch of huge grapes. The ice bridge under Arthas's feet exploded, and ice shards flew everywhere. Not to mention the Calamity Army monsters that couldn't dodge in time and were affected by the explosion, their broken limbs flying into the sky. Even Arthas was quickly exposed to this destructive energy turbulence. Unfortunately, when Arthas raised Frostmourne from afar, aimed it at the dragon breath, and triggered the frost elements to attack, the blazing red flames were completely consumed by the larger frost elements. After all, in order to surprise the attack, Duque didn't let Alexstrasza fly over in her dragon form directly. At least half of the power of this long-distance dragon breath was actually offset by Duque's portal. Blood Queen Lanaiza's eyes were filled with pain. Against the dragon breath, Arthas had won. This kind of half-baked dragon breath couldn't hurt Arthas in the end. But don't forget that Elun's attack had already arrived. Arthas adjusted the tip of the sword so that it was aimed at the sky again. The shocking amount of frost elements began to adjust the direction of the wind, and once again aimed the arrow at the falling star. It was still a step too late. Right in front of the Alliance and the Calamity Army, the meteorite that flew from the sky fell along a purplish-blue, rainbow-like trajectory. As Tyron smiled, the purplish-blue glow directly hit the ice mountain that Arthas had temporarily constructed. With a loud boom, continuous explosions and flashes began to spread across the surface of Winter Lake in all directions. Chapter 1561. The earth arched up, as if there were hundreds and thousands of giant sandworms moving beneath it. Large chunks of ice the size of cars were easily thrown into the air like grains of sand, and then exploded into even smaller pieces. A small crater formed in front of everyone's eyes. Apart from that, there was dust and ice everywhere, and nothing could be seen clearly. The effect of this blow was great. Legend had it that a meteorite killed countless dinosaurs on Earth, and Earth directly entered the Ice Age. Elun's starfall, with all her strength, was not that exaggerated, but it directly changed the appearance of the Earth. The so-called sky fell and the Earth split. Wow! No matter how many times I see it, it's amazing. This distance seemed a little close, but in fact, it was 2 or 3 kilometers, which was a good distance to see the fireworks. The effect of fireworks wasn't good at close range, but it was better to see the whole thing from a distance. Duque snapped his fingers, and his demigod made move tables and chairs out of his storage bag. Just like that, he sat at the entrance of Alcafen's treasury with a group of women, like a crowd watching melons. It was clearly Duque who planned the scheme, but after it was done, he acted as if it had nothing to do with him. Jaina was also amused by Duque. You say it as if it has nothing to do with you. Arthas had nothing to do with me if he just hid in his turtle shell. I'm just here to travel and get some money. Is it necessary to come out and scare people? And a stairway made of ice. The women next to him giggled when they heard this. What Duque didn't say was, even I'm not as pretentious as you are. So, in the name of punishing evil, Duque directly asked Elun to deliver justice to the fool. Queen Sylvie was a little resentful. Can't you just smash Arthas to death here? Duque shook his head with slight regret. If I could, I wouldn't let him go. Unfortunately, I can't. Duque pointed at where Arthas was. On the other side, the chaotic flow of sand and dust a moment ago suddenly became orderly. Something, with an even more powerful momentum, broke through the turbulence of elements and dust, and rose slowly. The smoke and dust were washed away. A translucent, half-solid ice skull the size of a stadium appeared. It was impossible to describe what kind of existence it was. Abominable? Scary? Or indescribably disgusting? The moment Jaina saw the illusory ice skeleton, the last good impression she had of Arthesa's childhood disappeared. The best description for the ice skeleton was an evil composite. The souls of thousands of intelligent creatures who died tragically under the scourge were all bound in Frostmourne. The faith of justice could form the holy light. The prayers of the evildoers turned into the darkest resentment and mixed with the wronged souls, forming this evil thing that could not be tolerated in the world. This terrifying amount of negative energy that could only be described as astronomical was Arthesa's greatest trump card. Of course, there was also the ice elemental realm. You're shamelessly ganging up on me again. Duke Marcus. Arthese was in a very sorry state. There were clear cracks on her mysterious blue-black armor, and her icy voice was much weaker than before. It was the pure resentment in his heart that made him shout out again. Pfft! Duque laughed shamelessly, and his godly voice came back immediately. You speak as if the scourge doesn't rely on numbers every time they go to war. Fight me one-on-one on neutral ground if you can. You can choose any place you want outside of Northrend. Humph. No need to be so troublesome. Unexpectedly, Arthese still didn't give up. With a shake of her feet, the ice bridge that had just collapsed reformed again, and Arthese charged toward Duque. Moreover, over 1,000 meters away, a large ice skeleton had already been tossed over. It was the wronged soul cannonball that was separated from the huge skeleton made of wraiths. You really don't learn from your mistakes. Let me once again evoke the horrifying memory in the depths of your soul. Duque smiled faintly. Standing in the middle of the road in the middle of Wintergrasp Lake Fortress that seemed to have been abandoned for countless years, Duque stood against the wind. In front of the gigantic skeleton that was at least 10 stories tall, his body seemed incomparably small. It gave off the feeling of an ant overestimating itself and challenging an elephant to an arm wrestle. At first glance, Duque would definitely be crushed into powder by the terrifying power of the Lich King's wraiths. However, whether it was Duque's woman or the surrounding Alliance soldiers, no one had any expressions of shock on their faces. Instead, most of them looked like they were waiting to watch a good show. Duque made his move. His somewhat rough hand stretched out towards the illusory skeleton. It looked like a human and a skeleton, and their sizes were completely disproportionate. This hand displayed a kind of magical power that seemed to penetrate the heavens and the earth. In the air behind Duque, there were also countless energy veins that flickered with the unique purplish-blue light of arcane spells. From tens of millions to hundreds, they continuously converged together like rivers flowing into the sea. When these magical circuits finally converged on Duque's arm, his palm appeared to have a purple electric light. Duque seemed to be able to easily grasp the entire skeleton in his hand. In his hand, the skeleton rapidly shrank, and the surging souls inside were all restrained together. The vengeful spirits that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws seemed to have run into an invisible cage. They were reflected back by the invisible barrier that was equally invisible and untouchable. Immediately, every fingernail on Duque's 5 fingers shone with a holy golden light. Those who stood close could even hear the faint sounds of the priest's morning prayers. The bone-chilling white skeleton seemed to finally open its empty jaw and let out a final howl. Unfortunately, in the dazzling golden light, it only shook slightly, and the ferocious skeleton changed. It turned into a human face. The facial features were quite blurry, and one could only vaguely make out where the facial features were. One thing was certain, and that was that the position of every part of the face and the lines became softer. If the skeleton just now was the most evil and brutal murderer, then the human face now was the most devout and peaceful believer. The surrounding temperature suddenly became warm, and all the wraiths changed their color and shape, turning into small yellow light spots, as small and warm as fireflies. The light spots quickly gathered into a warm ball of light, and finally, it was firmly controlled by Duque's hand within a very small area. Duque still had a smile on his face. "Arthas, do you have any other tricks you want to play? If you do, hurry up, or you won't have a chance later." This time, it was Duque who took a step towards Arthas. Chapter 1562. Arthas's face suddenly changed. The helmet was indeed a good thing. Without it, even his subordinates would be shaken by his boss's change of expression. Arthas immediately discovered that he was losing control of the ice elements. "You, he." Duque sneered. The weave itself was an energy network that existed in different dimensions in the world of Azeroth. He couldn't successfully invade Northrend before because the dominance of all the elements here had been solidified. The ice element was the least active of the four major elements. Under normal circumstances, it would be more difficult for these elements, which were used to the Lich King's command, to betray him than a beastman betraying the humans. The area near the Ice-Crown Glacier was Arthas' home ground. If he wanted to take over the place, there was a prerequisite: the owner was not there, or the owner was seriously injured. Making use of Alexstrasza's dragon breath and Elun's meteor, Arthas's injuries were definitely not light. But if he wanted to die from serious injuries, there was still a long way to go. What Duque was doing now was taking advantage of Arthas' weakness to seize control of the ice elements on the periphery of the Ice-Crown Glacier and dig out the roots of the Fool. As a demigod of the weave, Duque's strongest element was naturally the arcane element, followed by the ice and fire elements. His control of ice was definitely not weak, but it wasn't that strong in comparison. Although Arthas had the geographical advantage, he was a Death Knight and a mage. Moreover, his ability to control ice was transformed from fire to ice after Zul became a Lich King. After all, Zul was first a shaman and then a warlock. For a warlock who used to play with fire to be able to play with the ice element so smoothly and even give this ability to Arthas after the soul fusion, this could be considered as amazing talent. Unfortunately, a part-time job was not as good as a person who was originally in this line of work. In the elemental boundary that mortals couldn't see, a battle was unfolding between Duque and Arthas. Taking advantage of Arthas' injury, Duque's frost elementals were charging forward violently. They were constantly attacking Arthas's frost domain with coordinated attacks and diversionary tactics. Every time he cut off a large piece of the frost elementals, Duque would completely tame this portion of the frost elementals and then attack the territory of Arthas' frost elementals. Duque was playing the Pharaoh version of rolling a snowball. Not only that, but an astonishing aura was rising in the distance. Alexstrasza was flapping her pair of red wings that could blot out the sky as she charged over at high speed. Her mountain-like body flashed across the sky like a bolt of lightning. Like a raging wave, she swept away the wind and snow in the air and blew away the frozen clouds. It seemed that she would arrive in front of him in less than a minute. At the same time, the thick clouds in the sky above Winter Embrace Lake had already dispersed. No, it looked like the entire atmosphere had been torn open, leaving a huge hole. In this Ice-Crown region that never saw the light of day, one could see the stars without any obstructions. Elun, one of Azeroth's two moons, was watching Arthas closely. In the distance, illusory prayers could be heard faintly. On the flying battleship, Tyrant's full-power attack had already exhausted her. At this moment, Chandris had replaced her position and was chanting prayers at the bow of the ship, working hard to prepare for the next starfall. Thinking about Otter's recent signs of instability, Arthas was in a difficult situation. He was faced with a dilemma: if he insisted on fighting Duque here, he would be surrounded and beaten to a pulp in minutes if he waited any longer. He was confident that he could defeat Duke with Northrend's geographical advantage, but he wasn't sure that he could win against Duke, Elun, and Alexstrasza, the three powerhouses who had stepped into the Divine Realm. If he gave up, his feelings wouldn't be able to take it. As a king, he was blocked at his doorstep by his rival in love. If this continued, he might not even be able to protect Northrend, let alone Lordaeron. This kind of grievance was driving him crazy. At this moment, the part of reason that once belonged to Zul began to take over the dominant position in Arthas' soul. If Arthas, who killed his father and master, was a typical example of courage to go against the heavens and the earth, then Zul was the representative of living a miserable life. In the beginning, he was tricked by Jaden to start a war against the Draenei. After shouting a few times to provoke the anger of the orcs, he left, not even wanting any power. Then, he let his disciple Dan take advantage of the loophole and control the entire tribe. The old tribe made a huge mistake, and even squeezed out the entire planet's core. When Northrend started to become a dead planet, and the old tribe's expedition to Azeroth was wiped out, Zul realized that things were not going well. He ran to become the third great chief of the tribe and organized a half-baked expedition. After being wiped out by Duque, he wanted to run to some corner of the universe to hide from Jaden. If Zul was thrown into a game like Pugilistic Escape, he would probably be the kind of unlucky guy who didn't fire a single shot, and survived until the last two people. He almost got a chicken dinner with 0 kills, but he fell to his death at the last moment. Anyway, after fusing with Zul's soul, Arthas gained more power, but in fact, it also weakened Arthas' spirit. Arthas became more aware of the situation. After the decision made by the heroic character proved to be a failure, the calm and wise Arthas made the decision to retreat. Slightly raising his head, Arthas looked at the huge moon in the starry sky, and said ruthlessly, "Duke Marcus, I'll wait for you at the Ice Throne." After saying this, his whole body disappeared into a sudden ice tornado. The ice bridge under his feet turned 180 degrees, and then turned around, carrying Arthas to the gate of Heaven's wrath. He left just like that. Servana's beautiful face was filled with unconcealable anger. Duque sighed. I still couldn't force him to use his last move. Jaina asked, which move? Duque's face was solemn, and there was no longer any smile on his face. That was the true anger of Frostmourne. 10 years ago, Arthas swept across the Lordaeron continent, and that evil rune sword absorbed the souls of hundreds of millions of creatures on both continents, from the weakest rabbits to the most powerful dragons. Countless souls created the terror of the Scourge army. This is also what we are most afraid of. If we take a direct hit, whether it is me, Alexstrasza, or Elune, we will probably fall directly, never to be reincarnated. Chapter 1563. Queen Sylvie immediately came to her senses and looked guilty. Sorry, Duque, I've wronged you. Duque waved his hand. Before fusing with Arthas, the Lich King Zul sealed the core of those souls in Frostmourne, and a huge amount of soul energy was sealed under the Ice Throne. He had to truly shatter the Ice Throne in order to release those vengeful souls and weaken Arthas to the greatest extent possible. Only then will we be able to truly destroy Arthas. It turned out that Arthas had this trump card. No wonder both Duque and Elune were hesitant to take action. At this time, the Red Dragon Queen flapped her wings and arrived. As soon as she landed, she did not even change into her human form. She asked in a booming voice, Arthas, that bastard, ran away. Why didn't he run when he saw you? Duque shrugged. He won't gain anything from fighting you. Damn it. At this time, Alexstrasza changed back into her Red Dragon Queen form. What can I do next? Do you want me to block the Gate of Heaven's wrath? Duque could not help but laugh. This reminded him of the famous Gate of Heaven's wrath incident in history. After Fordragon Bolvar and young Salyafar were trapped, the Red Dragon army burned everything around the Gate of Heaven's wrath to the ground. Then in the game, the 10-story-tall red dragon queen stared blankly at the gate of heaven's wrath as if she was reflecting on her mistakes. Unexpectedly, in this life, she actually proposed to block the gate. This was really interesting. But thinking about it, the gate of heaven's wrath opened in the northwest of the Dragonbone Waste. However, in the past 10 years, the Burning Legion had been causing trouble without a day of rest. The big shots of the Dragonsleep Temple had no spare energy to care about the Scourge Legion's invasion of Northrend. It was not until half of Kill Jaden was dead and the demons no longer came to the Void battlefield to cause trouble did Alexstrasza finally free her claws and prepare to deal with Arthas together with Duque. An evil Lich King who transformed a large number of dragon skeletons into bone dragons, desecrated the dead, and seriously obstructed the souls of his fellow dragons from resting in peace was already an eyesore enough. Now, he even opened his home right next to the dragon's home. Although the dragons did not occupy the entire Dragonbone wasteland, it was still intolerable. Alexstrasza, thank you for your good intentions. Just make sure that the main force of the Scourge doesn't wander around Northrend. You take charge of the Dragon Slumber Shrine and leave the rest to the allied army. Alright, the presence of life-giver Alexstrasza was a deterrent in itself. With her around, Duque could rest assured that he would be able to clip Arthesa's wings. Of course, before that, Duque still had to clean out Alcafon's treasury. Before entering the treasure vault, Duque didn't forget to contact William and Magni. Arthas drew his head back. Operation Icebreaking has officially begun. In the magic mirror, Magni was overjoyed. I knew you would never let us down. William, however, seemed a little regretful. I really wished to reach your level, Uncle Duque. Sigh. We can't interfere in the battle of the highest level at all. Duque calmly replied, that day is not far away. Both you and Magni have the potential to become demigods. This is not a consolation. Both of you really do have the talent. However, the path to becoming a demigod is not simply a path of pursuing power. It is also a difficult path of continuous self-reflection and finding the biggest shining point in one's soul. As long as you continue to work hard, one day you will realize that the line between mortals and gods is actually not that clear. Really? The simple-minded Magni looked pleasantly surprised, but those who were familiar with him knew that he wasn't enthusiastic about becoming a demigod. On the other hand, William, who was silent at the side, had a glint in his eyes. He, who was calm and collected, was the most concerned about this matter. Duque didn't know what to say about the two of them. In terms of talent, they were all heroes of the present age, 1 in a million, the cream of the crop. However, for mortals to ascend to godhood, not only did they need talent, but they also needed luck, courage, and wisdom. In history, Magni sent his soul deep into the Earth's crust during the Cataclysm, and he ended up becoming a human-shaped stone. After a long period of time, he became the first person in the history of the Alliance to step into the divine realm and ascend to godhood as a mortal. Before him, only Medivh was able to step into the divine realm and become a demigod as a mortal. William also had the talent, but unfortunately, he died in the battle at the Broken Beach in the original history. As for the tribe, only Thrall and Sylvanas had the chance in history. Since Duque was in charge of the Alliance, he could go to hell with the chaos of the Three Hammers and the great defeat at the Broken Beach. These were all matters for the future. His main goal now was naturally to defeat Arthas and the one hiding in Odal at the Cliff of Storms next door. Remembering something, Duque suddenly said, "Oh yes, Magni, are you free now?" Didn't you ask me to command the army?" Magni was dumbfounded. "Let Muradin command for 2 days first. There's a guy called Rock Guardian Archavon here. It's best if you deal with him. Very strong. Are you in a hurry to form a team of heroes?" "He's not very strong, but he's still a demigod. Actually, what I mean is, I'll hold the fort at most, and you can fight him alone." "Ah." Not just Magni, even Muradin, Bulang, and Kudrin were stunned. The four dwarves immediately acted out what it meant to be confused on all sides for Duque. Duque explained, Silegia will deal with Ice Guardian Turawan, Fire Guardian Turalan will be left to Onyxia, Storm Guardian Servanas will deal with, and you will deal with Rock. Understand? At this moment, all the dwarves' eyes lit up. If it was just to deal with the enemy, there would be no need to go through so much trouble. Duque purposely chose heroes with corresponding attributes to challenge the guardian of a certain element so that they could take the opportunity to train themselves. Powerhouses of the same element would often use the abilities and techniques of their opponents to prove themselves, thereby increasing their strength. As legendary powerhouses, Magni and Servanas had already reached the peak in the realm of mortals. This kind of training opportunity with a demigod on his side was really a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity. For a moment, even William was a little envious of Magni. Duque saw through this. William, I don't want to advise you to not be anxious. I just want to say that you can actually refer to Arthas. What? William was a little stunned. Refer to anyone? He actually referred to Arthas. Chapter 1564. The fusion of Arthas and Zol's souls isn't just a fusion of power. At the same time, it complements each other's personality flaws. Your soul was once split, and although it eventually fused back into one, the experiences you went through when you were separated created two different souls. Right now, there are still two variants in your body. Think about it carefully. First, you have to properly fuse your soul. How can you not have an impulsive and hot-tempered variant, or a timid and sly variant? William was stunned, and his mouth twitched for a long time before he said, Is it that obvious? Yes. Duque answered affirmatively. In my opinion, you work hard to prove that you are a perfect king. Unfortunately, what I see is you chasing after Anduin Lothar. You are also stimulated by my achievements, and you are more eager to improve yourself. Instead, it has caused the fused souls to show signs of separation. Do you know, Varian? This is a regression. Because back then, regardless of whether you were the ghost wolf or the puppet-like, timid you who was manipulated in the palace, they were all Varian Rin. Duque spoke from the bottom of his heart. If it were someone else, Duque wouldn't have had the time to say so much. William looked like he had been struck by a bolt from the blue and was in a daze. Magni was also stroking his beard, deep in thought. Think about it carefully. I suggest you try meditating in the dead of night. That is a good way to go back in time and reflect on yourself. Listen to the voice of the other Varian in your heart. William finally nodded heavily. I will host the landing battle at the Howling Fjord first. Okay, go ahead. Unlike the North Wind Tundra, which had many beaches and many landing spots, almost the entire coast of the Howling Fjord was a steep and towering coastline. The shore was full of reefs, and the ship could be destroyed at any time. Even if they managed to land, there was no way to go up the steep cliff that was more than 70 degrees vertical without an elevator or something. In terms of landing, according to the terrain, the best way was to enter the canyon in the middle of the south of the Howling Fjord. After entering, there was a lake-like harbor, Dagger Cove. In the Howling Fjord area, where there were strong winds of force 7 or 8, it was a rare haven. No storm outside could move the ships in Daggercliff Bay. Unfortunately, it was now the lair of the Vrykul. Putting aside the fact that King Vryku's Utgard castle overlooked the Daggercliff Bay, just the Vryku villages along the way, as well as the countless ballistae and old-fashioned muzzle-loading cannons that were aimed at the fjord were enough to make the Alliance's captains shudder. Under the cover of Naxxramas, William could only choose to land on the Long Spear Island in the western part of the Howling Fjord. He would use it as a forward base before landing on the Chaimir coast and the Sorav coast in the west. Finally, he got the dwarf craftsman to build a large elevator to transport the soldiers to the highlands of the Howling Fjord. After the first landing was successful, William was prepared to let Tyrion Fordring lead the Scarlet Cross of Lordaeron to land on the deserted coast of the east of the Howling Fjord. Finally, they would attack separately and join forces at Utgard Castle in the middle. As for the western front, when the North Wind Tundra was building the fearless fortress, it had already been infiltrated by the Alliance. This was because in this life, Malygos had not publicly announced that he would cut off the use of mana by mortals. Hence, the magic core area in the northwest of the North Wind Tundra, which was also Malygos' lair, was not in a hostile state yet. Duque could not find a reason to let the Alliance guard in that direction. He could only secretly detain an elite troop near Lake Cumia in the middle of the North Wind Tundra, and let the Horde's troops split into two. The main force followed Salyafar to the eastern front, ready to fight the Vrykul. The troops of the Warsong clan, which would sooner or later belong to Braindead Roar, were sent to the southwest of the North Wind Tundra, and stuck between the Alliance and Malygos' Blue Dragon Legion. Completely unaware that Malygos might cause trouble, the Warsong clan's beastmen casually landed in the western part of the Northwind Tundra and began to build the Warsong fortress, as well as a series of slaughterhouses and granaries named after Warsong. Unlike the barren lands where there was no prey, the Northwind Tundra was cold, but there was plenty of prey. The fellows of the Warsong clan were overjoyed, and praised the Alliance for their generosity. Duque did not know what expression to use to face them. Fortunately, the boss there was Muradin, a dwarf prince who did not know that Malygos might be unstable. Naturally, he faced the Horde with a peaceful expression. After making all the arrangements, Duque brought the girls and a dwarf king into Alkavon's treasury with a peace of mind. The huge Wintergrasp Lake fortress had been sealed for at least 10,000 years without any visitors. The low and mid-level elemental creatures wandering outside the fortress killed every single intruder that tried to break in. In the hall where the door to the treasury was located, many corpses of large spiders and Vrykul could be seen. They were either directly sealed in ice and turned into statues of death, or they were completely incinerated and turned into residue before being buried by the wind and snow. As for the elemental creatures blocking the way, Duque's elemental emissaries naturally cleaned them up. The structure of Alkavon's treasury was extremely simple. Aside from the passage they entered through, the entire structure of the treasury could only be described as up. At first, there was a crossroad, and then there was a straight and right turn intersection. At the end of each intersection was a giant guardian. Go. Accept your trial. Duque pointed his finger into the distance, full of arrogance. Miss Mount Onyxia, who was theoretically the lowest in status, nodded at Duque. First, she deactivated the ultimate transformation spell. In her field of vision, she turned from a delicate countess to a huge black dragon in less than 2 seconds. Fortunately, the passage to the treasury was extremely large and spacious, or it would not have been able to accommodate such a large black dragon running amok here. Along the way, the remaining elemental guards were directly trampled to death by the black dragon girl's claws. Vashti glanced at Onyxia's dragon back, as if complaining about her brutality, but she turned her head and smiled sweetly at Duque. Great master, I'm going too. She also transformed into a 6-armed snake-tailed naga. Swaying her waist, she drew her bow and shot arrows to clear the small monsters while heading towards where the Storm Guardian was. Magni glanced at Queen Sylph and blinked. She probably still had things to say to Duque, so he did not want to be a third wheel. I'm going too. That's right, if I die here, let Muradin inherit my throne. Perhaps he had wanted Moira to inherit, but when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he remembered that this disappointing daughter of his had actually given birth to a monkey for his nemesis, and lost all his face. In the end, he still said let Muradin inherit. Chapter 1565. Bulsh *T. Don't you know how strong you are? Scram! Come back early. I'll pass on your words to your brother. Magni ran over to the Rock Watcher's side, wriggling his butt. Looking at Magni's back, Duque was amused. As shameless as he was, he silently recorded these words with a magic mirror and then sent it back to the command center of the fearless fortress. What was done was done. Of course, Duque knew that Magni said this just in case. He thought that Duque would understand what he meant. If something happened to him, Duque would naturally pass the message. If he was fine, Duque would keep these words to himself. Who knew that Duque was full of bad ideas? Duque couldn't stand the elven princess who had a monkey with his father's nemesis. Back then, when Duque did this mission in the game, he was badly screwed over. Princess Moira was very straightforward. She killed her in 2 hits and then started all over again. It wasn't easy for him to withstand this shrew's 18 hits and beat her husband. She even scolded Duque and the other players for killing her husband, hinting that she would record the players in her little black book and settle the score later. What the hell was this? This was not how one should repay kindness with enmity. In this life, Duque really encountered this in real life. How could he tolerate it? Even though he knew that Moira participated in the siege of Orgrimmar and showed her loyalty to the Alliance, Duque was still pissed at her. So, Duque pretended not to understand the meaning of Magni's words and blurted it out. Anyway, Magni wouldn't die. As long as he came back, according to his personality, he definitely wouldn't deny these words. Then Moira wouldn't be able to become the leader of Three Hammer Council in the future. At this moment, Muradin, Bulang, Kudrin, and even the great craftsman Jurbin were all in the fearless fortress. When Duque relayed Magni's last words, the few dwarves were dumbfounded. Is the guardian of the treasury really that strong? Muradin was shocked. Although he could understand his elder brother's choice, he was still a little uncomfortable with this sudden sense of responsibility. Bulang, on the other hand, knew his big brother the best. But I can understand Big Brother's choice, this is the fate of a warrior. Destiny my ass, he'll definitely win. And I'm watching. Duque bared his teeth. The so-called watching could only ensure Magni's life. However, in the face of a peerless enemy, it was very difficult for outsiders to interfere in the challenge of breaking through to a higher level. This was the state of mind that a peerless expert had to face. If they had to rely on the help of others in order to survive this life challenge, their hearts as experts would definitely crack and be damaged. It wasn't that they couldn't pull themselves together in the future and challenge a higher level again, but how many people could guarantee that the gap of failure in their hearts wouldn't widen? For example, there were less than 1 in 10 people who could defeat a stronger opponent in one go and cross that natural chasm. Then the peerless expert who fought repeatedly and finally became a talent after being tempered was less than 1 in 10,000. After cutting off the magical communication, only Duque and Sylvanas were left. Queen Sylvanas stood a meter in front of him, with no intention of coming up to hug or kiss him. Not even a kiss before you leave. I'm your man, after all, Duque teased lightly. Queen Sylvanas shook her head. I'm afraid I'll waver. This is the path you chose. Queen Sylvanas said just as lightly, I know. From the moment I took the first step, there was no turning back, and there was no going back. Just like you carry the hopes of millions of Alliance people, and I carry the elves. It doesn't matter if they're called blood elves or high elves. In that case, go. Just remember to go crazy with me when you come back. Sylvanas smiled faintly and turned to leave, waving his hand as he walked. Fine. It's up to you if you pass. Duque was a little dazed as he watched, and after a long time, he let out a long sigh. As expected, Queen Sylvanas is indeed Queen Sylvanas. Once upon a time, the 3 Windrunner sisters had the same outstanding talent. They also had the title of hero. Sasha had chosen her family first, so both her career and combat skills had stagnated. Aurelia was managing the Silver Dawn. She was no longer fighting on the front lines because of her pregnancy, and her combat skills had also stagnated. Only Sylvanas became the queen of the Forgotten in history and finally ascended to the throne of the great chief of the Horde. Becoming a queen was both pressure and motivation. She had chosen the path of the strong. Duque couldn't say anything. He could only silently bless her. Seeing the women around him embarking on their journeys, Duque suddenly had a poetic thought. Life is really as lonely as snow. Then, he was pinched in the face. Are you lonely? Then what am I? Jaina puffed up her cheeks and put her hands on her hips, putting on an angry expression for the time being. He. Duque laughed dryly with cold sweat. Today's weather, not good at all. Jaina pounced with her claws and bit Duque's neck, leaving a shallow bite mark. Ouch! It hurts. Duque pretended to scream. Does it hurt? Jaina immediately changed from biting to licking. Duque stroked Jaina's golden hair. Silly girl, your path is different from theirs. Jaina hugged Duque's shoulder and seemed to murmur in Duque's ear, I know. They are the real strong who want to open their own path, while I'm just a little woman chasing after your back. Almost everyone in Duque's harem could choose whether they wanted to be a top strong person or not, but Jaina had no choice. Jaina was destined to repeat Duque's path because of the overlapping elements. Also, because she was born with only two elements, arcane and ice, her path was even narrower than Duque's. Since she couldn't surpass him, she would slowly climb to the demigod level and help Duque in the future. That was the end of her path. She needed to continue accumulating knowledge and strengthen her control over ice and arcane elements. At the same time, she would expand her magic circuit. When she reached the critical point, Duque would naturally give her a hand. Do you regret taking this path? Duque asked softly. Of course not. Jaina shook her head. If I really had the courage and decisiveness back then, I would have abandoned the proud Moor name. I would have devoted myself to the mysterious world. Since I chose to obey my father's orders, it meant that I had placed my fate in your hands at that time. Are you trying to say that you made the choice back then? Yes, but I don't regret it. Jaina hugged Duque tightly, as if she wanted to melt her body into Duque's. I won't let any of you regret it. Duque's gaze transcended space and landed on the first battle. Chapter 1566. The Guardian of Flames, Coriolan, was a giant with a height of 8 stories. His beard, which was several meters long, was weaved into mammoth tusks. His exposed muscles showed a strange reddish-brown color, and every inch of his skin was tattooed with strange spiral patterns, which made people wonder about the characteristics of his body. Even with the image that Onyxia sent back, it was difficult for Duque to define him as a living person or some kind of mysterious magical creature. Coriolan's belly looked like he was wearing a waste bag with a pot of molten steel, and a blazing aura gushed out of it. His thick arms were wrapped in a thick iron chain that required 2 people to wrap their arms around it. It looked like he was wearing a big red shawl, but this so-called shawl immediately angered Onyxia. Roar! That was her roar, full of anger. The anthropomorphic dragon's face was full of anger. Because this shawl was the skin of a complete red dragon. The so-called buckles on the shawl were 2 huge dragon claws, buckling down from the shoulders to the giant's knees. Behind the shawl was the dragon's abdomen, covering the back of Coriolan's waist, and the long dragon tail hung low behind the giant's butt. Onyxia had never liked red dragons, but she could not tolerate this desecration of the dragon's corpse. Unless a certain dragon was willing to atone for its sins, such as Talonista's, who had attacked the Alliance under the threat of Demon Soul. After Alexstrasza was freed, he had willingly died at the hands of Dylan Proudmoore. His dragon head was still hanging in the adventurer's hall in Iron Stove Fort. She suddenly understood why Duque assigned her to deal with a guardian who was also a demigod. When opponents with the same attributes couldn't overwhelm each other with their elements, the outcome would be decided by hand-to-hand combat. And the Guardian of Flames, Coriolan, was obviously a guy with the attribute of Dragon Slayer. Onyxia was definitely not weak in hand-to-hand combat, but that was only when she had an advantage in size. If the size was similar, then the dragon's small arms and legs would be the weakness. Because of the absolute weakness in strength, once the dragon's limbs were caught, it would be very disadvantageous for the dragon to fall into a pure close combat. Of course, her strength was not comparable to that of the unlucky Crimson Dragon on Coriolan. Just by looking at its size, one could tell that the Crimson Dragon was not a true ancient giant dragon. The problem was that growing from an adult dragon that was over 1,000 years old to an ancient dragon that was over 10,000 years old, the biggest improvement wasn't in strength, but in elemental control. Moreover, Onyxia did not rely on her age, but on her demigod bloodline. She had entered the level of an ancient WYRM in advance, and with the help of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, she was blessed with the power of the Earth aspect WYRM that her father, Nesario, had once given up. No matter how one looked at it, there was an element of spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. Her biggest problem was that her foundation was unstable. She was obviously angry, but Onyxia's heart fell into a very strange state of tranquility. She asked herself, "What should I do?" At the sight of Onyxia, Coriolan burst into laughter. His loud voice shook the arched hall that was 1,000 meters in diameter, causing dust to fall from the sky. "Ha ha ha! Despicable little dragon, you actually abandoned the duty that the Titans gave you and came here to covet the Titans' power. I didn't expect that after 25,000 years, the dragons have fallen so much. If it was Alexstrasza who came, the righteous Red Dragon Queen would probably have nothing to refute. After all, her brother, Nesario, had really fallen. It was Onyxia, the new dragon aspect, who was not a good dragon to begin with." She restrained her anger and showed a cynical expression. "Fallen? Perhaps. I went from being a free, evil dragon that did all sorts of evil things to being a mount for the righteous guardian of Azeroth, Duck Marcus. I rode him day and night. What a fall." Coriolan wanted to laugh. But thinking about it, why did it seem a little wrong? The evil dragon fell to become a mount for the righteous guardian? Why did it sound like a negative is a positive? Coriolan carefully sensed and was shocked to find that Onyxia actually had the pure aura of a dragon aspect. In theory, he, who was designated as a guardian by the Titans, was essentially no different from the dragon aspect that guarded Azeroth. Coriolan was a little confused. However, this was not enough for him to give up his duty. The Titans created him, and the guardian faith that was injected into his heart was something like an instinct. Coriolan spoke, and his voice once again shook the entire hall. "For the sake of your identity as a dragon aspect, I will give you a chance to retreat. I will not pursue you, but when you step into this place that you should not step into again, that will be the time of your death." Ha ha ha. It was hard to imagine that a black dragon could make such a crisp and melodious sound. The ridicule on Onyxia's face became more obvious. "I gave up my freedom and my dignity just to obtain a future under the command of the victor. Obviously, he is the master of fate, and you are not. Coriolan, right? It seems that a silly big guy like you would be a good guard for my master." Fire elemental guys were mostly hot-tempered. This was especially true for a violent giant like Coriolan. "Humph." With a cold snort, he directly attacked. Holding the pot of blazing lava in front of his waist, he did not know whether it was molten steel or lava, and poured it on Onyxia's head. Surprisingly, Onyxia chose to avoid it. She did not change her sinister and cunning nature at all, and the first move after the fight started was to dig a hole for Coriolan. Unlike other dragons that had a single attribute, black dragons and blue dragons belonged to the dragon species that had a variety of elemental characteristics. Blue dragons liked frost the most, and in fact, they were also very good at arcane and fire spells. Black dragons were even more common. Her father's Wings of Death was proficient in the three elements of shadow, fire, and natural corrosion. Her brother Nefarian's shadow flame was actually a shadow. And she was pure fire. Most dragons and giants were straightforward and did not have so many twists and turns. Seeing that Onyxia actually used a large and exaggerated movement to dodge the flames, Coralline was excited. Ha ha ha. Little dragon that is afraid of fire, you are so afraid of fire, and you dare to challenge the guardian of fire. You are dead. Coralline waved his hand, and a huge fire meteor suddenly flew out. The huge fireball was the size of a house, exuding a terrible high temperature and heat. If it was a mortal powerhouse, in the face of this level of destructive energy, they would definitely be burned into ashes in an instant. But at this time, Onyxia suddenly rushed in. She was like a fire phoenix that was reborn from the fire, and she took the initiative to jump into the huge fireball. In Coralline's surprised eyes, she suddenly broke the fireball, and fiercely rushed in front of Coralline, stretching out her sharp front claws. Chapter 1567. If this forward thrust was an accident, then Onyxia's next move was the second accident. In a battle between giant creatures, most of the time, it would be the most violent. You attack me, I attack you. It was a battle to see who could endure it first, or who could catch the opponent's flaw and give them a fatal blow. There were very few gigantic creatures that could play tricks as well as Onyxia. Facing the black dragon's forward thrust, Coralline was surprised, but not panicked. He waved his free left hand and punched the dragon's claw. The skin and muscles of the giant's arm were as hard as steel, and his left arm, which was originally wearing a bracer, was wrapped in rings and rings of solid iron chains. This formed a double layer of protection, so he was not worried about being hurt by the dragon's claws. At that moment, the female black dragon made an unimaginable move. She suddenly flapped her wings and made a hovering motion. Its claws, which were supposed to be attacking fiercely, merely touched the giant's left arm like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Then, the entire dragon somersaulted backwards, revealing its belly. More importantly, its long and violent tail, which was full of beauty, swept towards the giant's left knee at lightning speed. Even if the black dragon princess had shrunk to the size of a human, her tail was still an extremely sharp weapon. To say that it was a meteor hammer would be an understatement. Driven by the strong and developed tail muscles, the destructive power of the dragon's tail was at least hundreds of tons. This power could easily split mountains and stones. Lifting something heavy as though it were light, and then unleashing a thunderous strike. The guardian giant, who was not known for its speed, was hit on the spot. Crack! It was the crisp sound of bones fracturing. Even with the guardian's thick skin and flesh, having his leg broken was the only possible outcome after suffering a heavy blow to his joints. This was not the end. The sharp spike at the end of the dragon's tail directly hooked into Coralline's flesh. Onyxia, who knew very well that she could not be caught, tried her best to pull away the flesh from Coralline's injured part. A small piece of broken kneecap, along with a large fragment of the cruciate ligament, was pulled out by the dragon's tail. Ah! The giant let out a tragic roar, and the ferocious giant rushed over, trying to catch the black dragon's tail. But at this moment, Onyxia actually used flash. It was something similar to a flashbang. There was no real lethality, but the film on the dragon's eye could filter this strong light very well. Coralline, who was caught off guard, was slightly shaken. The black dragon, who already had some room to spare, immediately turned around and retreated. That strike just now definitely had the demeanor of an assassin. Once the strike succeeded, he immediately fled. Despicable. Is this the power of a dragon aspect? Corellon roared as he squatted down, clutching his leg in pain. I've said it before. I'm an evil dragon. It's just that you don't believe me. The ridicule on the dragon's face became even more intense. After destroying Corellon's leg with one move, Onyxia was not satisfied. She quickly launched a second round of attacks. This time, in theory, Corellon had caught her attack trajectory, but when his left hand caught the dragon's tail, he found that he caught nothing. Mirror image, even Pharaoh, who was able to reach the Morning Star realm, knew a small spell. Everyone thought that dragons only liked to use their innate abilities and elements, but this was actually a misunderstanding. For example, Krasis, this unusual dragon, was an all-round great mage. Onyxia was good at playing with fire, but she did not only know fire magic. She was also good at using arcane magic. With such a small trick, she seized the second opportunity and swung her tail again, directly smashing the entire area near Corellon's right collarbone. Even the muscles of the shoulder were torn apart. That was all. Corellon had underestimated the shamelessness of the black dragon. Onyxia actually took out a large bottle from her space bag and smashed it on Corellon's wound. This was one of the newest products of the Alliance, named sulfuric acid, by Duque himself. Well, of course, it was not as awesome as the acid of her dead father, Nesario, but it could be mass-produced. The strong corrosive pain made Corellon jump up. The battle had officially entered the rhythm that Onyxia liked. 5 minutes later, in the depths of the Alcafon's treasury, Onyxia's dragon roar reached the door. Duque and Jaina looked at each other strangely. It was obvious that this female dragon had won, because dragons who were in a fierce battle would not have the time to use the dragon's roar as a song, let alone the tune of Ode to Joy. Feeling the changes in the elements in the air, Duque was speechless. This unmotivated female dragon definitely did not win with the purpose of testing herself. The second to win was Vashj. This was not unexpected. The 4 guardians of the Alcafon's treasury were demigod bodies to begin with, and with the blessing of specific elements, their true strength was not too strong. Among the 4 challengers, Vashj had always been the strongest. Onyxia was only a demigod body, and Vashj was a true demigod, which was already a lot stronger. As a true demigod, it took Vashj so much time to win, proving that she had really won this battle with the goal of honing herself. Onyxia returned smugly, enjoying Duque's eye roll. Vashj came back a little pathetically, but what she got was a smile from Duque. Thank you for your reminder, Master. I am even more aware of my own shortcomings. As expected, the frost element is the direction of my development. Vashj returned to her human form and bowed deeply to Duque. It's good that you understand. Vashj might be a wizard, and she was very good at using the wind element's lightning. The 4 elements of Azeroth were earth, water, fire, and wind. In the end, the element that was most suitable for her was still water. This was inseparable from her 10,000 years of life at the bottom of the sea. She was born here, and grew up here. Giving up her talent attribute just to increase her lightning power was like throwing a watermelon to pick a sesame seed. Vashj understood, and Duque was happy for her. Only those 2 left, Jaina said softly. No, Shorty's side is just like that. He won't lose if he should win, and he won't win if he should lose. Once Magni accumulates enough, he will naturally win. There are no surprises. I'm only worried about Sylvanas. Because there's only a fine line between her victory and defeat. Duque was right. A duel between 2 earth element experts was actually very boring. Although it wasn't a fight between noobs, the 2 of them didn't have many moves. Rock Guardian Alcafon was a giant with the same body size as Corellon. The only difference was his accessories. His right hand and legs had been replaced with something that looked like a meteor hammer, full of protrusions. Chapter 1568. Whenever Alcivan used skills like trample or heavy leap, he would often deal terrifying damage to enemies that were smaller than him. This time, his enemy was a little different. Magni was a god descending to the mortal world, but it was a god descending in a special form. He completely released the restrictions of his body, allowing the earth element to enter his body without limit. If it was any other race, this would be asking for death. The dwarves were a little special. The bold and courageous dwarves were an ancient race. They originated from the earth spirits created by the titans in the early world using stones with vitality. Due to a disease known as the curse of flesh and blood, the dwarves' earth spirit ancestors went through a metamorphosis. Their stone hide became soft skin. In the end, these bodies of flesh and blood called themselves dwarves, and they established the powerful iron furnace castle on the snow-covered peak of Cosmodon. In a sense, dwarves were not pure living beings. They were more like half-living beings, half-elemental beings. After countless generations of inheritance and mutation, what people saw was a side of dwarves made of flesh and blood. The dwarves with the purest bloodline and the most astonishing talent could trace back to their earth spirit characteristics. For example, Magni Bronzebeard. Absorbing large amounts of earth element was a very risky method. If he absorbed an impure amount of earth element or too much, he would explode like a balloon. The result was out of his and Alcivan's expectations. His affinity with the earth element was very high. It was rare in the world. Alcivan was 8 stories tall, and after Magni absorbed the earth element that Alcivan had released, he was also 6 stories tall. Alcivan's body was rather well proportioned. Magni's horizontally developed body was still very comical even if he turned into a giant. At this time, Magni was very glad that Duque had agreed to give him, Savra's, Balrog Ragnaro's hand. Only a war hammer like this, which could be enlarged or shrunk by filling or reducing elements, was the most suitable weapon for him. Otherwise, even though he had grown so big, his weapon was still the one he had when he was more than a meter tall. It would be too small to even pick his teeth with. Looking at the blazing inferno hammer, Alcivan frowned. Originally, I hated all intruders, but you should be an exception, because you have a relatively pure heart of the earth. It seems that I was wrong. Completely understanding the meaning behind the other party's gaze, Magni replied loudly, "No, you didn't see wrong. My heart is indeed with the earth." Arcavan tapped the infernal hammer with his left finger. "Explain?" "Mother Earth bears all things. Without the earth, there would be no atmosphere. Liquid water, real wind, and prairie fire could not exist in the void. The earth was the foundation of all things. Since it's the foundation, then any changes are reasonable." Duque had brainwashed Magni for so many years, and had imbued him with a lot of scientific knowledge about transmigrators. Even if Magni didn't learn everything, he would at least know about 70 to 80% of it. Magni was actually very logical when it came to his theories. Originally, he did not expect this ancient giant, who had lived for at least 25,000 years, to understand. Who would have thought? He. Well said. Then you understand why this place is called Arcafen's treasury and not some other treasury, right? Book 6 Chapter 17. 3. Book 6 F***CK. There was actually such a thing? Seeing Magni's dumbfounded expression, Alcivan was very satisfied. "Come, don't waste time. Regardless of victory or defeat, you and I will have a long duel. Let's hope there are no other existences to interfere. I can sense a very powerful demigod entering the treasury. Azeroth, the newly promoted demigod of the Weave, Duke Marcus, is a true guardian. He must have his reasons for attacking this treasury," Magni insisted. "I hope so." The 2 giants, one tall and one short, began to fight just like that. To be honest, a duel between earth element experts was rather boring. Low attack speed, almost no technique to speak of. Basically, you give me a blow, I'll give you a blow. The one who could not take it first would fall. If it wasn't for the fact that the two of them could use techniques like jump slash, and when they jumped, they were like two small mountains playing bumper cars in the sky. Duke, who was secretly watching them, would have probably fallen asleep from boredom. Duque turned his attention to Sylvanas and Storm Warden Amaran. The biggest difference between Amaran and the other Storm Wardens was the bright blue runes on his body that were wrapped in circles. These typical Titan runes had the most primitive wind element power. With just a thought, Amaran could easily summon wind and lightning at a designated place. Although each of the runes looked simple, such as the one on his arm, which looked like the word big, but had its head cut off, each Titan rune was actually made up of more than 100,000 tiny runes. The mysterious light inside them rippled and moved continuously. Every time a rune was activated, it was made up of 100,000 tiny runes that were arranged in different ways. The mystery contained within was something that all the mages in the Dalajan would not be able to understand in their entire lives. Amaran looked at Queen Sylvanas, who walked into the hall with Solidar Wrath of the Stars in her hand and revealed an amused expression. Very interesting. You invaders are not here purely for the treasure, but to challenge yourselves. This is the most interesting thing I've seen in the 25,000 years I've guarded the treasury. Gently bending the bow, Sylvanas revealed a stern expression. Sylvanas Windrunner, I'm here to break through my limits. Do you understand the meaning of failure? Amaran asked with a booming voice. Sylvanas lowered her head slightly. At this moment, in her mind, there was the Long Song forest that was burned by the Beast Men, Silvermoon City that was destroyed under the iron hooves of the Calamity Army, the Sunwell that was trampled wantonly over and over again, Orgrim, Arthas, Kill, Jaden. When she raised her head again, there was an unparalleled determination in her eyes. Yes, I understand. It's because I know how terrifying failure is that I understand the value of success. Very well, come on. A battle between people of the same element was much simpler, more violent and direct than fighting against experts of other elements. There was no probing, and there were not too many twists and turns. After reaching a certain level of strength, there would be so-called convergence. Why did so many fighter aircrafts in Duzé's previous transmigration have similar appearances? It was because there were only a few methods that followed a certain pattern. In the face of such transcendental power, the form and performance of power would be completely different. Chapter 1569. A strong gust of wind blew. The blue Titan runes on Imaran's body flashed, and a level 12 typhoon tornado appeared. The violent storm made Imaran's huge body look blurry. After all, Queen Sylvanas was only 20 meters away from this 8-story tall giant. Mortal, since you have chosen to challenge yourself and pursue the path of the divine realm, then use your body to feel the greatness of the storm. The giant's rumbling voice completely merged with the thunder. Dark clouds of unknown origin shrouded the entire dome of the hemispherical hall. It was dark and frightening. What made Queen Sylvanas' expression turn even colder was that she suddenly realized that she had lost almost all of her attacks. Arrows would be skewed the moment they left the bow. Bow techniques and parabolas were useless. This was the pure suppression of the elemental domain. Unless she made a breakthrough in the elemental domain, Amaran was an existence that she could not defeat. Retreat, retreat, and retreat again. The evasion ability that Rangers were proud of was meaningless in the face of this wide area damage. The frail bodies of elves could only perish if they were pulled into the storm. Tisk, Queen Sylvanas spat on the ground. The range of the tornado continued to expand as Amalran laughed heartily. At the beginning, it only occupied the center of the hall, and now it became a large circle. At the beginning, Queen Sylvanas had a circle to move around, but in the end, it became a narrow line. Of course, she could leave the hall the way she came, but to her, that would be the worst failure. She could dodge, she could retreat, but she could not escape. Because this was her path, her heart of the strong, and her final stubbornness. Originally, she could have been a salary thief like before the incident at the dark portal. Even if she became a queen, she could have become a pure politician. She could even hide in Duque's arms and be a happy little woman. Anyway, she had her sister Duque, who could be her umbrella to shield her from the wind and rain. I chose this path myself. It was as if she was mocking herself, but also like some sort of self-hypnosis. After saying this, Sylvanas was filled with the spiritual light of a martyr. Duque, who was watching from afar, felt worried, not to mention the Windrunner sisters, who were watching this scene in Karazhan. Ah! For a moment, Aurelia had the urge to call Duque over to save her sister. However, she saw Duque clenching his fists and gritting his teeth. At this time, Windsor held her hand and shook her head. Second sister chose the path. Both us and Duque can only support her. She's not a canary in a cage, but a petrel soaring in the storm. Yes. Aurelia nodded heavily, her eyes filled with tears. On the other side, Sylvanas moved. He didn't have any attacking stance. He didn't even take his newly acquired divine bow, which was the envy of all the Alliance's hunters and rangers. Instead, he jumped into the storm with a graceful diving posture. In the eyes of the spectators, this was undoubtedly like a moth flying into a flame and courting death. The Windrunner sisters lowered their heads, not daring to watch. Even Lor, Themar and Hageron, who were far away in Sin Dorii, were mentally prepared to lose their queen. Duque had even taken out the divine artifact, Atish, and opened a short-distance teleportation portal. However, at this moment when everyone was watching, a sonorous and powerful female voice came out from the strong wind, "Don't look down on me. My surname is Wind." Fine. Swordsman. Almost everyone who was watching the battle through Duque's magician's eyes had the same reaction, first shock, then joy. In the magic mirror, Sylvanas's performance shocked the mortals. Her seemingly thin body actually spun at high speed with the whirlwind. That was a speed that was many times more brutal than being thrown into a washing machine. How many revolutions per minute? The mortals' eyes couldn't keep up with Queen Sylvanas' rotation at all. Even the rangers with the strongest eyesight could only keep up with her shadow. 50 revolutions? 100 revolutions. In any case, apart from Duque, no one could count it clearly. Everyone only saw Duque retract, Atish, and they instantly understood what it meant. The surnames in this world were different from before Duque transmigrated. In the original world, Mitarai represented where one was born. The surname Azeroth often represented bloodline. The Sunstrider played with fire. And the Windrunner naturally walked on the wind. But no one expected the power of the Windrunner family's bloodline to have such an astonishing upper limit. The Night Elves originated from the part of the trolls that had the most talent in elemental magic. The High Elves were the most talented in magic among the Night Elves. In order to maintain the magic talent of the next generation, in the past 8,000 years, the High Elves had used all kinds of methods to maintain the purity of their bloodline. For example, mages above the Radiant Moon level could only marry a Radiant Moon level. That was why the Silver Moon Council, a behemoth whose power, interests, and bloodline were all intertwined, was formed. Even the king couldn't fight against it. Elves who lost their ability to cast spells were seen as inferior, which was why the various ranger families that didn't have a high status in Kuel Salis came into being. The current Sylvanas could no longer be called a simple ranger. The surging wind elemental energy on her body could be clearly felt even through the magic mirror. Because the wind had changed color. The wind in Amalron was grayish-white, and now the places that Queen Sylvanas flew at high speed had turned purplish-black. Duque froze in shock. His gaze turned to the lightning that kept flashing in the clouds above the hall's dome. The lightning that seemed fine to outsiders was actually engaged in a shocking battle of attrition. Duque was a little unfamiliar, but he still recognized this method. When Gavin Rad obtained the Wind Sword, the Wind Prince Sandran had used it. This meant that Sylvanas, who seemed to be at a disadvantage, was directly mobilizing the lightning power in the clouds. This was definitely not the power of mortals. The others couldn't even see Queen Sylvanas' figure clearly, but with the help of the system, Duque could clearly see that there was a purple emblem that resembled lightning reflected in Sylvanas' eyes. It was flashing, and was wrapped in a dim, tornado-like radiance. Amalron, who sensed that something was wrong, began to pay attention to Sylvanas. An extremely uneasy feeling enveloped him. That feeling was too distant, and he didn't know how many years ago, a great existence with the same terrifying aura had almost blown him into ashes with one blow. Chapter 1570. Amalron had once thought that the Titans were omnipotent. The greatest Titan had to create something that was the greatest. Clearly, this deep-rooted understanding that he had held onto for 25,000 years was completely broken at this moment. When the Titans of the Pantheon first descended on planet Azeroth, it was during the most terrifying period of the Dark Empire. At that time, there were trolls, mantis demons, bugmen, but there were no elves. But now, a descendant of an obviously mutated subspecies actually displayed a stronger control of the wind element than him, a first-generation Titan's creation. How could he accept this? Sylvanas's rotation with the tornado was getting slower and slower, because this meant that even the wind that Amalron had created was gradually being controlled by her. Be it shock or admiration, as the guardian of the storm that controlled the source of the wind element, Amalron had no obligation to continue supporting the enemy. Very soon, the storm stopped. But Queen Sylvanas was suspended in mid-air. It was a powerful yet miniature tornado that was supporting her. Her long, slender, and beautiful legs were completely wrapped in the swirling black wind, and there were even lightning snakes flickering in the wind from time to time. Her brilliant golden hair had turned silver at some point, and then it was faintly dyed purple in the glow of the lightning. This is a pleasant surprise. Duke's face finally blossomed into a smile. Second sister, she, Aurelia and Windsor said in unison, "How is she?" Duque smiled as he read out the description of Queen Sylvanas in the system vision. "Of course she is, the demigod of the Azeroth Wind, Sylvanas Windrunner." She's a little weak." "Humph. Second sister is indeed the strongest among us sisters." Windsor raised her nose. "Duque, that last comment of yours is a little redundant. The sisters, whose blood was thicker than water, had single-handedly broken through the boundary between mortals and gods. In the face of such a heaven-defying achievement, Duke actually made such an evaluation. No matter how good Illyria's temper was, she was a little angry now. What else could Duque say? He could only smile bitterly. At that moment, the will of planet Azeroth had responded and accepted Queen Sylvie as the planet's demigod. If what Sylvanas requested from the world was an empty domain, she would definitely be able to obtain even more resources. Unfortunately, her demigod oath was just wind. Just like when Duque was a demigod of the Weave, he had to fight with Ragnaros for control of the fire element. By doing this, Queen Sylvanas was going against the big boss of the wind elemental circle, Wind Wielder Al-Akir. Yes, the Prince Thunderin who gave Gavin Rad the Wind's word was his son. Although in the original history, Sylvanas deserved to be taught a lesson and was eventually beaten like a dog by the Alliance and Horde, the two sides had yet to come into contact with each other, so it was impossible for Sylvanas to obtain many wind elemental resources. Apart from the small amount of wandering wind elements, none of the wind elements were willing to listen to her. So in a sense, the current Queen Sylvie was only the weakest of demigods. Duque shrugged. Well, let us congratulate Her Excellency Sylvanas Windrunner. She has successfully stepped into the realm of gods. From this moment on, as long as Azeroth is not destroyed, she will be in eternal existence. The so-called eternal was the true meaning of immortality. Just like the wild demigod Malorn, who had been killed by Archimonde in the ancient war, as long as the time was right and there was enough energy and the corresponding summoning ritual, he could still be resurrected for you to see. His own woman had broken through to the level of demigod with her own strength. Even if she was the weakest, at least this spirit was worthy of celebration. Duque was still watching, but his mood had changed from the initial nervousness to relaxed and joyful. If 99 out of 100 people had to die, and only one survived, it would be called a grand escape. If the 99 people who died and the one who survived could all start over, it would be called a game. Different starting points meant different mentalities. Dooku and the other onlookers had already gone from feeling as if they were experiencing it themselves, to being onlookers. Of course, Queen Sylvanas was Queen Sylvanas. She was arrogant and unyielding, and she persisted to the end. Whether it was in the past or now, whether it was in the original history or this life, nothing had changed. Perhaps it was because of her dazzling moments that she had earned such an exaggerated amount of popularity among the players. Amalron had already retracted his storm elements, because if more elements floated outside his body, it would be no different from giving support to the enemy. Unfortunately, he was a bit late. Even without knowing much, just by looking at the size of the elemental domains surrounding Queen Sylvanas and Amalron in the magic mirror, one could judge the difference in their strength. Although Queen Sylvanas' strength had increased qualitatively, in terms of quantity, Amalron still had the upper hand. Now, the ratio of the black thunder and wind and the grayish-white tornado in the field of view was 3-7. Queen Sylvanas had just stepped into the realm of gods, and she was greedy for all the wind elements that could be converted into her power. She, who had not fired a single arrow since the start of the battle, turned the tables, and starlight flashed on, solidar stars of fury. Every time it flashed, it was like a vacuum arrow suddenly traversing the entire sky and landing in those seemingly nonsensical places. Only Duque exclaimed, "Beautiful." Duque, why did you say that second sister did a beautiful job?" Sasha directly sent a magic message to Duque. Normal people can't see it, but if your elemental senses are strong enough, you can see that those are Amalron's wind elemental control nodes. Duque smiled and replied, destroying the other party's control points means that the other party can release the elements they control, and then both parties can fight again to determine the ownership. It was unrealistic to bring all the elements in the airspace under one's control. After all, the purest elements that were like arms would always only be a small handful. The most standard way for an elemental controller to control the elemental energy in a wide area was to use a single point to control the elemental energy in a spherical area, then connect all the points into lines, and then the lines into a structure like a tree's roots, finally controlling the direction of all the branches on the main trunk. What Sylvanas was doing now was to cut off the other party's roots so that he could more fairly snatch the elemental energy from the wind elemental realm. Mortal, you're not bad. You're really not bad. But what about this? Amalron raised his arms high, and the titan runes on his body, shoulders, and thighs all shone with a dazzling light. The next moment, countless lightning chains shot out from the tips of his 10 fingers. Obviously, when the elemental nodes could not be hidden, this Guardian of Storm directly used the method of strengthening them to deal with Sylvanas's attacks one by one. Chapter 1571. As long as Sylvanas' vacuum arrow hit Aimeron's elemental node, it would produce a great suction force and destroy the structure of the wind elemental energy there. However, this storm giant had directly used chain lightning to strengthen it, which meant that these nodes were directly under his control, and there was no possibility of them collapsing. But at this moment, Queen Sylvanas laughed instead of being angry. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he was looking at a female fox with the surname Proudmoore. The arrows of Solidar Wrath of the Stars were infinite. As long as the user still had spiritual power to pour in, it could infinitely gather the light of the stars, forming arrows that could be shot out like lightning. Queen Sylvanas seemed to have increased the number of vacuum arrows in a fit of pique, but only Duque could sense that each vacuum arrow was only strong on the outside. The previous vacuum arrows maintained the shape of the arrow until they hit the target, then suddenly formed a small whirlpool like a black hole, sucking in the surrounding air to achieve the goal of destroying the node. The current vacuum arrow had already lost its shape halfway through, and began to suck in the surrounding air. The spiritual power that was poured into it was completely incomparable to the first batch of vacuum arrows. Unfortunately, the strength of the giants was never their perception. The Titans had bestowed the giant guardians with surging elemental power and a powerful body that surpassed most creatures in the world, but they no longer had the luxury to bestow them with superior perception and adaptability. Amalron didn't even notice Sylvanas's small movements on the huge gauntlet on Solidar. Until he poured another wave of even stronger lightning power into his 10 fingers and poured it out. Queen Sylvanas slowly got into a posture of knocking an arrow. This time, it was not the kind of quick bowstring, and the string that extended out of the bow was no longer blurred starlight. Wind as a bowstring. Lightning as an arrow. It looked like it was stirring up nothingness, but in reality, it was stirring up a level 12 wind. The wind surged violently, and finally converged into a thread. It was clearly an invisible stream of wind, but it was countless times tougher than steel wire. As the streamlined muscles on Queen Sylvanas' arms gently swelled, the void actually produced a sound similar to playing a zither. Only then did Amaran realize his mistake. His power was too scattered. It was true that Queen Sylvanas' total amount of wind elemental energy was inferior to his, but at this moment, Queen Sylvanas' power was condensed, and the quality of her lightning energy far surpassed his. The bowstring vibrated. The lightning arrow, which was supposed to be loud and powerful, was shot without a sound. That was even more terrifying. A bolt of lightning flashed across the void. Even the guardian of the storm Amaran, who had the title of Thunder, had a huge hole in his left palm from this attack. Almost in the blink of an eye, everyone could feel the decline of the Tempest Giant's aura. Congratulations, you've won. Blood Elf Sylvanas Windrunner. Unexpectedly, Amalron, who was clasping his hands, didn't show any signs of fighting to the bitter end. The battle between you and me is over. However, the battle between us Guardians and the one who is truly trying to dominate this treasury hasn't ended yet. Emelran's words made Queen Sylvanas feel a little confused. As the winner, you can get what you want. This Guardian of the Storm was very straightforward, and directly used his uninjured right hand to tap on the Titan rune on his shoulder. Immediately, the Titan rune that seemed to have lost the word big floated down from the sky, and slowly came before Queen Sylvanas. This is the mark of a supreme being in the Pantheon. Accept it. It also means that you have accepted the mission of protecting Azeroth. This and the planets will accepting you are two completely different things. If this is what you need, then it is yours. This time, the usually decisive Queen Sylvanas hesitated. She pursued power and strength, and didn't mind sacrificing her power for the people she loved, for this beautiful planet. However, the mark of the Titans in the Pantheon. If she accepted it and became a servant of the Titans, and did things against her will, what would she do? She almost instinctively turned around and looked into the void. She knew that Duque was definitely watching this scene. Her poor knowledge of the universe wasn't enough for her to make a judgment, so she could only ask her lover for help. Duque's voice came right into her ears, accept it. But when you make the oath, use the name, Titan of all living beings of the Pantheon. Titans were Titans, why did they have to add the word all living beings? Weren't all living beings just living beings? Wouldn't that mean that any living titan could order her around? Queen Sylvanas hesitated. Trust me. Duque emphasized. All right. I trust you. Since Duque didn't explain, Queen Sylvanas didn't ask. After spending so many years together, Sylvanas was sure that there was a deeper reason behind what Duque believed in and swore to keep a secret. This unconditional trust made her touch the Titan rune, which was even larger than a table, with both of her hands. A huge amount of knowledge on using the wind element surged into her sea of consciousness like a tidal wave. She didn't notice that the remaining Titan runes on Amalren's body started to dim one by one. In just a few breaths, they were almost devoid of light. At the same time, the rock guardian Archavon suddenly stopped his attacks. What's wrong? Magni asked, panting. Finally. I'm the only one left. Was that sorrow? Was that a sigh? Or was it the sadness of fate? That indescribable feeling caused Magni's fighting spirit to subside. The two giants, one tall and one short, looked at each other. Can you feel it? Magni Bronzebeard, the guardian of the rock and the earth. The earth bears all things, but it can't stop everything that happens on the earth. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, watching all things prosper and watch all things wither. The cycle repeats itself, but it can't change anything. This feeling, this understanding, do you have it? Archavon said in a low voice. Magni used the flaming devil's hammer to hit the giant tower shield he had formed with the earth element, and it let out a strange buzzing sound that had nothing to do with the earth element. He said in a clear voice, the earth should be watching. But if the earth shatters, all things will cease to exist. Rather than watch helplessly and hopelessly, why not let the burning legion know what the fury of the earth is? After saying that, Magni's eyes turned red. This made Duque's heart skip a beat. This seemed to be even more skewed in fate. No matter how he looked at it, that damned dwarf king had walked on a path of power that was different from history. Chapter 1572. What happened to the earth element specialization? Seeing this scene, Duque felt as if he had fallen from the sky. Yet, Duque, who was the disintegrator of the original works of history, was the one who had turned Azeroth's history upside down. He had no right to say anything. He could only bless Magni in his heart. As long as you're happy. The giant-like Magni leaped high into the air. A 6-story-tall dwarf performing a jumping slash was quite a shocking sight to behold. That was an unmistakably earth-shattering event. Even with Archavon's thick skin and thick flesh, he didn't dare to receive this attack. He leaped back, moving over 20 meters in a flash. But Magni still didn't let him off, and slammed his hammer onto the floor of the hull. Crack! The ground was collapsing, and a tremor akin to the movement of the Earth's crust spread out. After a short period of shaking, a small volcano appeared in the center of the hull. Scorching lava splattered in all directions, the highest reaching a height of 100 meters. Archavon couldn't dodge in time, and was hit. Arg! The dwarf's lava clearly had some special power added. Caught off guard, Archavon was plastered all over his face, and he cried out in pain. Magni didn't let him off easily. He swung the house-sized Balrog hammer and smashed it at Archavon with all his might. Bam! With a horizontal sweep, Archavon's helmet was smashed. Bam! With a vertical chop, Archavon's head caved in. If he was a normal human, Archavon would have been as dead as a doornail. But as a special existence that was half life and half elemental, this kind of injury wasn't fatal. Archavon's giant palm, which could send a small fort flying with a single slap, swept Magni, who had a stable footing, over. He couldn't see with his eyes, but he could sense all objects on the ground. He leaped onto Magni's body, riding on Magni's thick bucket-like waist, raised his two large fists, and smashed them down on Magni's head. Against such a suppressive attack, the most standard way to retaliate was to use a kick to the opponent's back, and send him flying. Unfortunately, dwarves had short legs. Even though he had become a giant, the proportions of his body remained the same. This meant that Magni was unable to defeat his enemy with this move. Not fighting back wasn't the dwarf's style. Magni did something very shocking. He actually transferred the elements and power of the Balrog magic hammer away, and then used both his hands to block Alcon's arms, returning a hammer blow to Alcon. That's right. It was King Headbutt. The blazing Balrog's fire was like a shining red helmet on Magni's head. As the owner of the Flaming Devil Hammer, he did not need to worry about being injured by the flames of the Flaming Devil Hammer. Let's see whose head is harder. Magni shouted with his thick red neck. Archivon really wanted to say, "You're King cheating." Headbutting had always been a way to kill 10,000 enemies while sacrificing 8,000 oneself. It all depended on whose head was harder and whose head was the so-called soft shell. But now, Magni's headbutt was pressing down on the other party's skull. Even though Archivon's essence was an earth elemental, having such high purity flames and lava flowing freely on his head was extremely painful. This time, he no longer wanted to suppress Magni. He wanted to leave, but it was Magni's turn to hold him tightly and headbutt again and again. Every collision had the feeling of a collapsing mountain. But the characteristics of the Balrog magic hammer allowed Magni to have the upper hand in this exchange. Come on. This is fun. Let's hurt each other. The Shorty King shouted wildly. This scene made Duque and the other big shots of the Alliance hold their foreheads and sigh. F***CK. What happened to the battle that represented the highest level of Azeroth? A guardian with a demigod's body, and a peerless expert who was trying to break through to demigod. The two of them fighting was no different from a street brawl. Are you King kidding me? This time, even Duque turned off the magic mirror. He did not want to watch anymore. The outcome has been decided. Standing in the middle of the passageway in the treasure vault, Duque waited for Sylvanas to arrive. Queen Sylvanas had finally crossed the most difficult boundary between a mortal and a deity. The next step was simple accumulation of power. Congratulations. Duque opened his arms, looking like he was asking for a hug. To be honest, Duque was still a little uneasy up until this moment. A mortal becoming a deity was something to be celebrated, but the sea of divine power and elements entering one's body would also impact one's soul. Duque had read many novels before he transmigrated that humans could easily lose themselves in such situations, becoming more like a deity than a human. When a deity weighed everything on a scale and weighed the gains and losses before acting accordingly, would such a deity or demigod, just as Duque's thoughts were running wild, Queen Sylvanas had already pounced on him, her fragrant red lips pressing against his. Sylvanas always gave him a sense of independence. He had his own thoughts and his own principles of action. Most of the time, she would give up her private time for her compatriots and to govern the country. She was great, but obviously, she would not be a good partner. At this moment, she was like a little wife who had finally found her way home after going through hardships, throwing herself into the arms of her lover. I'm sorry for making you worry because of my stubbornness. Exhausted, she showed an apologetic smile. It's good that you're back. Duque stroked Queen Sylvanas' hair. He noticed that her hair color had changed from brilliant pure gold to pale platinum. Are there any changes or effects? Kiss me again, and you'll know. Duque was happy to do it, but in the end, woo woo woo. Duque's tongue was numb. What the hell? Queen Sylvanas' tongue was electrified. Seeing Duque's embarrassment, Queen Sylvanas giggled. Her gorgeous smile made her look like a mischievous little demon on Halloween. Duque, I can't learn to be gentle and virtuous even in my next life. I am who I am. Queen Sylvanas had thought that Duque would be a little annoyed. Unexpectedly, Duque's smile became even more gentle, and there was a hint of fascination in it. Yes. You are who you are, the one and only Sylvanas Windrunner of Azeroth. After waiting for a while, Magni's side was also done. Magni, who had returned to his normal form, was that short man who was 1.5 meters tall again. Although his face was bruised and swollen, he still held his head high and looked very arrogant. It was as if the one who had broken through the mortal boundary wasn't Queen Sylvanas, but him. Magni said in a gruff voice, "Hey! Duque, the 4 guardians have been defeated. What about the treasury? I don't care about their so-called treasures over the years. I don't care who takes the treasures. I at least want to know what the treasures in this treasury are." Chapter 1573. That's right. What was the treasure? The so-called treasures in the original Alkavon's treasure vault were the godly equipment dropped by the Guardians. As long as a player was determined to fight in the arena, they would be excited to see these pieces of equipment. In reality, the items dropped by the 4 Guardians weren't very useful. Duque could say that the treasure vault itself was a trial given by the 4 Guardians to the challengers. This was definitely true. Different people would have different comprehension and encounters. Didn't you see Sylvanas becoming a demigod in one leap? However, there were always greedy and curious factors in human nature. Of course, this had its flaws, but it was precisely these 2 factors that promoted the progress of society and civilization. Following Duque, the big shots of the Alliance were used to getting rich. Insignificant epic-grade equipment could no longer enter their eyes. They pursued a higher level, and similarly pursued more things that could prove their glory. Duque smiled mysteriously. Do you want to know? You can look, but as for what it is, please think about it yourself. I can only say that your efforts today will not be in vain. As soon as he finished speaking, a huge wave of arcane elements surged from Duque's body. It was as if the radiance of the stars in the sky was flickering on his body. Looking closely, one would realize that all the flickering lights were actually mysterious arcane runes. Some of the runes even gave Queen Sylvanas and Magni a strange sense of familiarity. Countless flashing runes flew over, and under Duque's will, they turned into rings of light. They formed concentric circles with Duque at the center, and then spread out in all directions of the treasure vault. In just a few seconds, the few who had successfully defeated the Guardians and returned victoriously discovered that the 4 Guardians had actually revived. Onyxia wanted to transform on the spot and beat someone up. Wait. Vashj pulled her back. This time, not only did the Black Dragon Princess notice, but the others also realized that the Guardians walking over from the 4 directions of the treasure vault's passageway were completely silent. These 8-story giants couldn't be as silent as cats when they stepped on the ground. The only explanation was that the 4 of them were perfectly welcoming, or that they didn't exist in the same spatial dimension as Duque. The Rock Warden Alcafen spoke. Guardian of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. Your strength and wisdom are very great. It is no exaggeration to say that you are the wisest and most powerful existence I have seen in the past 25,000 years. Duque didn't act arrogant. He bowed slightly towards Alcafen to express his respect. How did you find out that we didn't die? Our bodies have indeed completely disappeared from this world. As for the so-called accidents, everyone understood that the best example was Nesario. He had turned from a good dragon aspect to a powerful and crazy villain. Was Duque hinting at something by saying this now? Magni didn't care about this. Hey! Where are the treasures in the treasury? You haven't answered my question since the beginning. Duque deliberately kept them in suspense. You will know soon enough. If you are unlucky, perhaps Alcavan will kill his way to the Iron Furnace Castle and destroy your nest. He dares? Magni blew his beard and glared. If I can beat him up once, I can beat him up a second time, a third time, countless times. He. Faced with Magni's questioning and Queen Silvani's indirect questioning, Duque refused to say anything. This made the four fellows who had just participated in the challenge so angry that their teeth itched. After coming out of the treasury, other than Queen Silvani running off to show off, oh, no, the whole nation celebrating Queen Silvani's entry into the divine realm, the expedition to the northern continent had entered a steady state. The western front was under Magni's control again, while the eastern front was under William's command. The Alliance's 200,000 troops gathered at Utgard Castle and began to besiege King Vriku and his subordinates. Chapter 1574. In the northern region of Northrend, most of the areas were extremely cold. Duque did not know how the Silver Northern Expedition was organized in history. He only knew that even though he had made so many preparations for the conquest of Northrend, there were still all kinds of ridiculous situations. However, there were many soldiers in the Alliance who knew their soldiers well. An old dwarf lectured the new recruits, "Let me tell you, the commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, is the commander who knows his soldiers the best. If it was in the past, you could only wear broken leather boots. When your toes froze black, your toes would be dead and useless. Now, you have imported animal hides from the tribe and cotton boots to protect your feet. Cotton boots, cotton-padded jackets, spiked shoes, snow tracks, military rations and hot soup that could be heated by pulling a wire. Duque even strictly ordered that the toilets must be connected to the barracks. If the soldiers left the barracks to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, even if the toilet was only 5 meters away, they might freeze to death due to the snowstorm. All these details reflected the meticulous preparations that the Alliance had made for this northern expedition. Usually, after sleeping in such a world of ice and snow, even if there were tents, there might be many soldiers who would never wake up the next morning. They did not die on the battlefield, but in an unknown place, which was quite a blow to the morale. But since the simple hot beds and the new mobile central heating system were invented, the non-battle losses of soldiers camping in the wild had basically dropped to single digits. William led the Alliance army to attack the Howling Fjord, and in history, less than 10,000 people could kill their way to Utgard Castle. It was not that the Alliance and the Horde did not want to invest more troops, but that the logistics could not keep up. Now, it was completely different. The flying fortress Naxxramas opened the way, and the Alliance forcefully landed on the shoals on the east and west sides. Then, huge conveyor tracks were set up on the shoals, and the diesel engine drove the tracks to transport boxes of military supplies to the plateau of the Howling Fjord, which was tens of meters high. Soldiers, heavy tanks, and other military equipment were transported back and forth by large elevators. Looking at a group of soldiers using a fire that had been prepared in advance to burn the lower part of the diesel engine, William felt a sense of extravagance. He smiled bitterly. Could it be that Uncle Duque really has the ability to predict the future? Once upon a time, Valera would always play the role of cheering William on and encouraging him, saying that he could surpass Duque. However, after spending so much time together, Valera could no longer say it. Perhaps. The Alliance had only popularized diesel engines in the past few years. Steam engines could not operate in extremely cold weather, but they had been tested. But it was hard to estimate how good a diesel engine would be in a damned place like No Scent. After all, there were not many extremely cold regions in the Eastern Kingdom. Even the snow-covered Loch Moden and the former Alterac only had a temperature of a few degrees below zero. There wasn't a single military consultant or staff officer who suggested how to start a diesel engine that was completely frozen by frost in a temperature of -40 degrees Celsius. When the problem arose, most of the Alliance army was in despair. If the Alliance's technological products were excluded, it meant that they could only rely on the most primitive infantry and the Griffin Knights to fight. If that continued, the Alliance would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Who knew that in less than 2 minutes, Duque would reply and ask them to set up a stove under the engine to roast it? It sounded ridiculous, but during World War II on Earth, both the Soviet army and the German army did this in extremely cold weather. Otherwise, even if the soldiers used hammers to smash the ice on the outside, the inside would still be frozen into a lump of ice and would not be able to move at all. If they wanted to roast it, to what extent? He replied, "The ice has melted, and the outer armor has started to turn black. Leave the rest to the antifreeze oil." It was a simple, violent, and meaningful solution, and it was settled just like that. However, everyone knew that Duque had never been in the snow for the first half of his life. Something that even the dwarves couldn't do was solved by him. Not only did he use the stove to deal with the frozen machine, but he also used the antifreeze oil. The dwarves had to go through thousands of experiments before they could come up with a better formula. However, Duque had already given them the formula for the results, so he just F*King did it. Black technology was thrown out one after another, making the gnome and dwarf inventors dizzy. Gerben complained more than once that Duque's actions would make their scientists useless. Duque shrugged. "The Burning Legion will make a comeback in less than 10 years. I can't do anything about it. Why don't you let the Burning Legion be late, and I'll give your scientists more time to practice." Gerben was speechless. With such powerful modern equipment, the armies on both the east and west practically advanced while laying railways. With an irresistible momentum, it only took a little more than a week for them to converge under Utgard Castle. The East Army directly set up heavy cannons across the Imolan waterfall on the east side of the castle, while the main force led by William on the West Army set up the cannons and lined up the Orc Infantry Legion led by young Salyafar. This was not only making the best use of everything, but also a form of deterrence. The bombardment of the 155 mm heavy cannons only took a few minutes to leave the stronghold of the Vrykul King Imolan riddled with holes. In the eyes of the Alliance's cannons, a castle that had not been reinforced by magical protection arrays was just a large target. The city that the Vrykul had spent a whole 10 centuries to build was destroyed by the cannons of the Alliance in a few minutes. "Air Defense Unit, get ready." William raised his 2 swords, Ceremony, which was a combination of the Shadow Ripper, Sharatol, and the Shadow Plunderer, Aramin, high up. As expected, the Vrykul, who had half-giant bloodlines and huge bodies, continuously poured out from behind the destroyed high walls of the castle. They spread their legs and swarmed towards the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde in a messy formation. The Vrykul were loyal to their king Imolan. Although the orcs always said that they were a race born to fight, compared to the Vrykul, it seemed that the Vrykul were more worthy of this title. If they were just the giant Vrykul, it would not be enough for the Alliance to pay so much attention to them. The real name of the Vrykul was the Dragon Raider clan. Among the most commonly seen progenitor dragons, these beasts were different from their relatives of the 5-colored Guardian Dragon clan, who had been bestowed some power and high intelligence by the Titans. The progenitor dragons did not have a magical physique, and their intelligence was slightly lower. Strictly speaking, they were standard dragon beasts. They did not have the long necks of their distant relatives of the Guardian Dragon clan, and their tails were shorter. However, the proportion of their head was larger, and their strong jaws made up more than 40% of their head. The wings were very powerful, but the front legs were almost completely degenerated. When not flying, the wings played the main role of supporting the body. The hind legs were thick and strong, and were the main tool for hunting. Compared to the Guardian Dragon clan, their entire body was more streamlined and suitable for flight. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.